Good evening, Council. And we're going to start out tonight with a proclamation regarding Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week.
We're coming.
Got some props. Hello. Hi. Say what, I'll read the proclamation and then we can go ahead and, you want to hand it out now? There's one for everyone. Should be one for everyone. National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. Whereas for the past 27 years, the National Coalition for the Homeless and the National Student Campaign Against Hunger and Homelessness has sponsored National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. And whereas the purpose of the proclamation is to educate the public about the many reasons why people are hungry and homeless, including the shortage of affordable housing in Ames for very low income residents, and to encourage support for homeless assistance service providers, as well as community service opportunities for students and school service organizations. And whereas there are many organizations committed to sheltering and providing supportive services, as well as meals and food supplies to the homeless, which include Assault Care Center Extending Shelter and Support, also known as ACCESS, Emergency Residence Project, Food at First, Good Neighbor Emergency Assistance, Mid-Iowa Community Action Agency, also known as MICA, Story County Community Services, the Hunger Collaboration, Salvation Army, Veterans Affairs, and Youth and Shelter Services, also known as YSS. And whereas the focus of National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week 2019 is to continue to volunteer, donate, educate, and whereas the City of Ames recognizes that hunger and homelessness continues to be a serious problem for many individuals and families in Ames, and whereas the intent of the National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week is consistent with the commitment and dedication of the members of the Two Rivers Committee and the Homelessness Prevention Team to educate the community and to provide the needed services and support to citizens who suffer from hunger and or homelessness circumstances. Therefore, I, John A. Hala, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim November 16th to 24th, 2019 as National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. On behalf of our community, I encourage all citizens to recognize that many people do not have housing and need support from citizens and private, public, nonprofit service entities. And I'll let Vanessa make a few comments and also introduce your guests.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and Council, again, for your support of National Hunger and Homeless Awareness Week. It's so important that we keep it in front of us, because in our community, if it wasn't for the agencies behind me, which are represented by Story County Community Services, Emergency Residence Project, United Way of Story County, and Youth and Shelter Services, this is just a few of the 10 agencies that you help support funding-wise to make this cause happen. And we don't necessarily have an event this year, but we want to make sure that people are aware that hunger and homeless is not just Awareness Week, it's awareness period. So we're wearing our bands tonight that says we're here to donate, volunteer, and educate. And we want to share that with you to wear your band. And each agency will have bands to hand out to their groups and to their citizens and anyone who's for the cause of supporting this important services in our community. And the need is great right now. And we're all feeling the calls from people needing home or needing food. So we thank you for the opportunity that you continue to support it. I support these agencies. We work good together, and just thank you for the opportunity to proclaim this week.
Before you go, can you comment on what the status is on the food pantry? Because I understand that some food pantries are kind of low on supplies.
So I convened the hunger collaboration at the United Way of Story County, and it came to my attention that a number of our local food pantries, including the Salvation Army and Mid-Iowa Community Action Pantry, which are two of our three biggest pantries, their shelves are virtually completely bare. There's been an increased need. And so we're looking to address that as a hunger collaboration in terms of long-term changes, maybe doing a drive, at the end of August, beginning of September, because there seems always to be a shortage. But again, just to throw that information out to you folks in the hopes that maybe your service clubs, religious communities, and so on could help generate some food and also just some monetary resources for those pantries to purchase needed items.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. They'll be available outside.
Okay, next we have a presentation by the Ames International Partner City Association regarding proposed Kosovo relationship. So we'll invite you want to introduce yourselves and just give the council an update, please.
Sure. Excuse me. My name is Tom Sauer.
Pat, excuse me. Wow, there must be.
Very emotional.
Yes, I know. Pat Sauer.
And we share a seat on the Ames International Partner City Board. And so I'm going to start with just a timeline of this potential relationship with the nation of Kosovo, and then we can have questions. It's going to be very brief. Mayor Hyla received a letter from the mayor of Podaheva, Kosovo last September of 2018. And the mayor wrote the letter to request to establish a sister city relationship with Ames. The board included this in our end of year newsletter, asking for interested parties to contact the board. And then in our February meeting, the board decided that we should at least pursue the possibility of this relationship. In order to start that, we invited representatives from the Iowa Sister States organization and the consulate of Kosovo, which is in Des Moines. It's the only consulate in the state of Iowa. Representatives from ISS and the consulate briefed the board on April 8th and described the ongoing relationships between several Iowa cities and their sister cities in Kosovo. The board asked me to lead a subcommittee. According to our bylaws, if we establish a new sister city, that subcommittee is appointed to investigate those options, and I was asked to lead that subcommittee. Since then, in July, we some of the members of the subcommittee attended a picnic with the Iowa Sister States and consulate at Saylorville, and also had a meeting at the Ames Public Library with ISS representatives and actually the chief of mission from the consulate, the new chief of mission from the consulate. They're very eager to establish more sister city relationships between Kosovo and Ames, and so they're very supportive and very encouraging of us of pursuing this relationship. They set out the steps for how this would proceed. And one of the first steps is that we would like to request that Mayor Hyla respond to the mayor of Podaheva, essentially just indicating an interest in pursuing this relationship. The next step would likely be the Iowa Sister States organize a trip to Kosovo every June. And so the next step would be to have some representatives from Ames go on that trip and actually meet with representatives from the city in Kosovo. And that would take place in June. They asked that we coordinate the letter or exchange the letter through the consulate, and that the only other criteria that's been mentioned, and I'd like to stress the fact that this is quite wide open at this point, is that the Ministry of State, I believe, of Kosovo has to approve any relationship. So there's one last sort of bureaucratic hurdle there, and that the mayors actually have to meet to sign the agreement. One of the reasons that, well, first of all, Kosovo is very much connected with Iowa through the Iowa National Guard. So when the country was formed, the Iowa National Guard had a large role to play in training security forces. And so, in fact, General Timothy Orr, who retired recently, there was a retirement party for him in Kosovo. So there's a very close relationship there, and I guess you would say a great fondness for Americans in Kosovo. So they're very eager to have closer relationships. It's a very agricultural country, so there's a lot of similarities with Iowa, a lot of rural agricultural-based economy. So that's another reason for seeking a relationship with the state of Iowa. After the July meeting, I actually did exchange emails with the deputy mayor of Pudeva, and essentially the same message keeps on coming through. We're very interested. Agriculture is one of the keys. He mentioned perhaps sending students or having student exchange, but I think unlike the Japanese sister city relationship, which is mature and sort of well structured, I think this is more wide open. All of the other sister cities in Iowa have really unique kind of relationships. Some of them involve teachers, some involve FFA. DMAC has a large exchange. So they're all sort of unique and tailored to, I think, to the interests of the party, which is good. And so really all we're trying to do tonight is to make people aware of this possibility, and that we have your support to continue down this process of investigating this relationship.
And one other item, an update on Japan. It used to be, we used to send adult delegations and students, and there were 2 delegations per year. And Japan, because of their other relationships with other sister cities, has requested that there just be one delegation exchange, and that it be between students with adults, of course, as chaperones. So with that being said, there's less activity on our side in sending both a youth delegation and an adult delegation.
Can you comment just on what you see as the benefit and value to having a sister city relationship with other countries and cities?
Yes, I led the last adult delegation to Japan. They gave a presentation at an elementary school, and they asked if any of the students had a question, and the little girl raised her hand and she said, "I've never met a foreigner before, but they're pretty nice." And I thought the mission is a success right here. And after I thought about it for a while, I thought, there's probably lots of students in Ames, in Iowa, who could say exactly the same thing. Their perception of people from other countries is only from media or movies, and that they have we think we live in this global economy, but there's still a lot of people who don't have that connection or even the possibility of that type of relationship. And I think there's a real value in walking in other people's shoes and seeing what their world is like, and in many cases how it's not that different than yours, even though they may not speak the same language or share some of the same customs.
And can you just comment on the timeline for issuing that letter too?
Yes. So I think there's no great urgency. The trip in June is probably the next activity that we're really, we may continue to exchange emails amongst the subcommittee and the deputy mayor, but there's no real deadline before then.
But the sooner the better to send that letter to the mayor of Kosovo if the council is supportive of that.
That's right. I think they were the head of mission in Des Moines actually wanted the mayor of Putaheva to visit Ames, but it's an election year. And so,
Imagine that.
yeah, imagine elections getting in the way. But so they were unable to do that. But that was their suggestion, is that they send people to here. And so I think now with the timeline pushed back, it's logical to go the ISS trip.
Okay. Other questions for?
Tom, thanks for all your work. I mean, there's a lot of work that went into this. This is the first time we've had an opportunity to think about expanding the sister cities. So we have, is it Enzin? Is that the name of the city in Japan?
Koshu City.
No,
Koshu City.
Koshu City. And then, is it Freedom Mystic?
That relationship has dissolved.
That's dissolved.
Mhm.
So do we just have the one sister
Right.
city relationship?
And we were approached by a community in Italy. They were interested, but then
It didn't develop.
it didn't develop at all. So
And there's also been contact from China.
So the world's a big place. I mean, this is a conversation we really haven't had. So I don't even know how to think about the question.
Well, I would just suggest that if council supportive, that we would maybe under council comments, just go ahead and make a motion to put this on agenda for in 2 weeks to talk about it further, and then staff can give us some more direction on financial implications. And then if you're in support, we can send a letter to. You can direct me to send a letter to the mayor of Kosher City, if that would be.
Okay.
If that's that way. It's not. It's actually on a presentation. It's not actually listed as an agenda item
Right.
tonight in terms of taking action on it.
Right.
Anybody else have any questions? I know you guys put a lot of time in. I know you appreciate you going to Japan. There was no interchange this year, though, right? It was last year that you,
Yep. So the youth exchange every other year.
yeah. So, but I think there is some money budgeted, I think, in the for
There is.
paying for some of the.
so there will be an exchange for youth this next
Oh,
year,
in
fact,
2020.
They're screening.
Back
youth
to
right now.
Koshu City.
Right.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yes.
They're screening youth applicants right now
Yeah.
for that trip.
Yes. And if any of you are interested as adult chaperones, I think there are a couple of spots that are available. And I know that city council and the mayor, previous mayor, have gone to Koshu City. And I would say it's an amazing, life-changing experience.
Anything else?
You're taking middle school kids? That would be a life-changing
Yes.
experience.
To a foreign country.
Actually, sometimes adults can be just as challenging as
Yeah.
youth.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, and also, you had a PDF that you were gonna send to me, and I can get that out to council that has some more information on this opportunity as well too. Is that right?
I will.
All right.
I'll send it.
Very good. Thanks for
guys.
coming. Appreciate it very much. Okay, moving on to consent agenda. Does council have any items they wish to pull? I would like to pull item number 10. So if I could get a motion on consent, less item 10.
So moved.
All right, roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Okay, on item number 10, the only reason I brought this up was that this appointee to ZBA, their term would actually expire on April 1st of 2024, not on 2020. There's a typo in the, so just if I could get a motion approving that appointment with the term expiration in 2024 versus 2020, I'd appreciate it.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Aye.
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 Very good, thank you. All right, moving on to public forum. We have two cards here. And we'll call up Allison Brundy first, and then we'll have Jerry Neal after that. And if you could endeavor to keep your comments to 3 to 4 minutes max, I'd appreciate it very much.
Hello, my name is Allison Brundy, 3125 Maplewood Road, and thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. we're here representing Ames Climate Action Team, and we would like to present a petition that we gathered during the Youth Global Climate Strike. And so it's kind of a petition, kind of an open letter. And so I'll just read a little bit of the beginning here. The scientific community around the world agrees that climate change is occurring and is human-induced. Scientists also warn us that if not addressed, climate change will accelerate beyond our control. We call on the city of Ames and Iowa State University to reduce greenhouse gases and phase out greenhouse gas pollution to zero, and to develop methods for sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. To achieve this, we request that plans with verifiable phases be urgently forged to rapidly shift to 100% greenhouse gas-free energy by 2030 and eliminate other community-wide greenhouse gas emissions to address this emergency. I have a little letter here that is a little bit longer. I don't need to take time right now, but also we see these articles in the news and various journals, and last week an article from 1,000 scientists came out from 153 different countries saying, we really need to face this, and citing moral obligation to speak up. Their paper called for massive changes to sectors of society to also underscore the possibilities for greater human well-being inherent in a just transition away from fossil fuels. So to think of it as something that's urgently needed, but also an important opportunity, and to address a lot of different social justice issues. So we have these signatures for you, and shall I leave them here?
Please.
Okay.
Yep.
And
Thank you, Allison.
Jerry Neal, 916 Ridgewood Avenue, here in Ames. So Allison mentioned people talking about transitions and major sector changes, which leads me to think about the fact that all of you and some of us are involved in a lot of long-term planning right now for the city of Ames. We've got the 2040 plan, we've got the 2045 LRTP, we've got budget cycles that are getting started. So as a concerned climate citizen, one thing that worries me about this is the inertia that's built into those processes. I respect the processes. I understand why we have them. I think that's very important, but they do lack the urgency that seems to be indicated by what's happening with the climate. So I think I'd like to call back to your attention a letter that was submitted in October of 2019. And the letter was actually to Tim in response to an inquiry, but all the council was copied on it. And in it, the climate action team had quite a laundry list of suggestions for Ames for climate action. And a number of them could be initiated now or in upcoming council meetings. So a set perhaps of what we might call intermediate actions, things that we can do. And I'll give 3 examples, just to throw out 3 examples for folks. The 2040 plan is in play. We could actually, and I know this is a bit extreme, but we could direct RDG to include a climate assessment statement or comments or facts with each of their scenarios. We could do that, and they would be capable of doing it, so we could add that there. Budgeting is starting. We should think about increasing staffing hours, so the time to support sustainability leadership, any kind of policies that we might want to consider. So that's an item for the budget that could be thought about it. And finally, we have to think about how do we have public support for any kind of changes that are coming up before council or the city. So maybe we can do something fun. And we were thinking about some sort of a competition, which the mayor could perhaps sponsor. Perhaps a carbon drawdown competition where people came up with ideas for Ames or something like that. There are a lot of things that we can do, but I just wanted to call your attention back to the fact that there is that letter, there's kind of a laundry list there, and we would like us to keep thinking about that and how we incorporate that into the work that we're doing now. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I did read the letter, but it was a few days ago. Were those 3 suggestions for immediate or
They're
intermediate?
embedded in
For the
that
end
letter.
of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the
Yes, thank you.
suggestions are embedded in the letter.
Thank you.
I forgot to kind of point out in this petition, we have a couple points, but just recognizing that it is budget time, that we urge you to budget for doing a climate action plan. And I know that the next part of the agenda kind of addresses the greenhouse gas inventory. And so I shouldn't talk about it too much, but I'm excited and looking forward to that part of the agenda too. So I know you're doing work on this, and lots of other great things are happening in Ames. And thank you for all the work that you do.
So just to clarify, you're just asking council to consider putting in the budget for next year.
Correct.
Money for a climate action plan. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And, you may have other ideas on how to move these suggestions forward. So that's great too.
All right. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
And so just so you know, also in our council packet, our non-agenda packet, that letter is included for us. So during council comments tonight or dispositions of communications to council, we'll probably be talking more about that specific letter.
Is it at the end of the meeting?
It is.
So what? So just
Join
just-
us. We have to stay.
How lovely.
So what happens is that when we get letters like yours, which we do appreciate very much getting it, and we do read them, is that they go to council at the end of the meeting, and then if they want to refer it to staff for either a memo or to put on in a future agenda, it gets done that way. So really, there won't be any public comment. There won't be any discussion other than the fact that we want to go ahead and take this or take something from it and move it forward, essentially. So it's a process we go through. Talking about inertia.
It's good to have a process.
So anyway,
I
the point is,
understand.
you're certainly welcome to stay, but the point is that I think the conversation may be a bit a minute, but there won't be any
Yeah.
public input allowed on that one. So
And then as far as like we're here right now and the next item on the agenda is something we shouldn't comment on right now.
no, we'll ask for public comment at that time.
Okay.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. Does anybody else wants to make any address council in a public forum? Seeing none, we'll close public forum. We'll move on to item 24, resolution awarding contract to Pale Blue Dot LLC of Maplewood, Minnesota for community greenhouse gas inventory.
Good evening. This council action item addresses one of the city council goals, which is to expand the sustainability efforts by evaluating the community's greenhouse gas impact and looking for ways to reduce it. We have an RFP before you for approval. I have to add, first of all, that it says it's coming out of council contingency, but I went back and looked at the records, and it actually comes out of general fund. Anyway, just several months ago, you had asked us to move forward on finding a consultant for a greenhouse gas inventory, and we gathered together a cross-section of several departmental representatives to assess RFPs that were returned in October and score them, which we did. We looked at a process where in our RFP, we looked at standard protocols for determining how to build a greenhouse gas inventory, what would make this standard with other communities. And we looked at the consultants' expertise. We got consultants from, I think, international, one from Canada. We looked at their expertise in doing greenhouse gas inventories specifically for municipalities and even more specifically in Iowa in the Midwest. And we had a nice variety of responses to look over and came up with a standardized ranking. And in the end, we are here to recommend Pale Blue Dot out of Minnesota. Mary can talk a little bit more. She has a little more experience in this area about a greenhouse gas inventory and sort of the scope of the work. And then we can answer any questions you might have.
So we put forward for the RFP, basically looking at 6 primary task areas. We wanted to certainly have a kickoff meeting, and in that kickoff meeting to identify more specifically what our emission sectors and our emission categories would be. We did, as Susan mentioned, looked at what would be in line according to reporting platforms for other communities and in line with the Governor's Covenant and other different platforms for communities related to signing on to resolutions, which of course Council has already done, related to the mayor's declaration. Then we would go about doing the data collection within the community. And what we are asking them, the consultant, to do would be to forecast out for 2030 and 2040. Based upon if we continue to do our operations and we continue to basically have the same emissions impact as a community that we are currently doing, so we can get an idea of what that looks like. And from there, make recommendations as far as target areas and some primary things that we can look at doing as a community. We would also then ask them to provide a tool that we could use for future inventory, emissions, collection, and estimation. We want to obviously continue to do this once we've established this baseline. And of course, to be presenting to findings, present findings then to council. I would also add that there were a couple of other items that this vendor in particular offered that we thought made really good sense for us as a community and the sort of things that we would be looking at related to future planning and action items. One was to complete a climate vulnerability assessment, and that actually looks at projected climate change impacts that we are expecting as a world, how that impacts our community, where we would be most vulnerable related to operations, related to populations, and amenities, and to really be able to have a forecasting of that. Secondly, looking at renewable energy potentials that we have in our community. So this would actually be looking, as it mentioned in the vendor information, would be looking at taking aerial photos, then looking at gross square footage and assessing the feasibility for rooftop installations and other installations around our community as far as how much we could increase our renewable energy capturing. At the presentation to council, that would be the opportunity where we would get public comment and look at additional information that we would want to be incorporated or additional discussion we would want in the final report then from there. That's a basic overview. Happy to answer any questions.
Would the renewable energy potential study, would that also involve looking at current ordinances as they relate to like rooftop solar?
I think that would certainly come into play as we looked at, as we look at what's available. Certainly, we want to overlay current restrictions or considerations that are already in place.
Right.
I think that would have to be considered.
So it appears that the scope is both citywide and city operations for
Correct.
this. Does the citywide include anything to do with Iowa State? Or
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah, it looks at all of, as a community, it's looking at all that we consume. It's looking at all that we bring in related to energy. Then you can get down into, and this is something that, we'll talk to the vendor about. So that's basically scope 1 and scope 2. That covers wastewater, energy. Scope 3 gets into consumption. It gets into the impacts of if we, take recycling, for example, off-site. What are some of the implications of those operational decisions that we have made that's being processed? A little more difficult to really get down into the details on for a lot of consultants. And so these will be things that we'll discuss with them, sort of the feasibility of how far down we can get to some of those. Definitely the primary impacts related to our consumption and our consumption decisions from an energy, water, waste consideration. And those are the two, if we look at the platforms and what the platforms really consider and what they're wanting on that international scale, even scope 1 and scope 2 are overarchingly, where that overlap is. So we're definitely making sure that that's covered.
So following up on Bronwyn's question.
Sure.
Are we also looking at the ways in which some of our ordinance or incentives might be working against our goal of sustainability? For example, we have incentives for certain kinds of development that might involve a lot of demolition. We have very cheap demolition permits citywide.
Sure.
Is there some sort of way that we're getting information on how our policies and ordinances are negatively impacting lots of things?
Oh.
Well, and I followed up with Haley Dodd on that. They said within the current inventory, there isn't a specific way of looking into that because this is high level. They could conduct a small exercise, which they called red flag, green flag, and just doing kind of a high view of our ordinances to help identify those that may need to have a deeper dive if the council decides to move into a climate action plan. They agreed it would make sense to include something like this in the inventory, but that the more in-depth review is something that is more of a natural fit with the climate action plan, and then determining which policies and ordinances would need to be enhanced or revised going forward.
Yeah, I would say usually things like this you see in the climate action planning pieces as you move to how other communities have handled it.
Pretty detailed.
Yep, right.
I was surprised when I read this. The price tag on this is very small. When we look at going out and getting consulting work, normally it's many times this. And then I realized that what they're really doing is they're just number crunching. We're going to give them some data sets, and based on that, they're going to come up with a model. And maybe, Mary, my question is for you on this. Is there a sense that this is accurate? When we think about the carbon that our city produces, if we're looking just at the data that we provide them and they run this through some kind of algorithm, is that really a true measure of the greenhouse gas emissions? I don't know how, I'm a bit skeptical when it comes to things like, the different manufacturers that we have. Are they going to be able to, will the consultants be able to accurately capture the greenhouse emission gases in these various sectors of our community?
Well, what I would say is they've done a few of these, and they've used a few different tools to look at estimating different manufacturing sectors and different types of manufacturing in order to really get their heads and hands around that. So I think that, certainly there could be some estimation that goes into some of this based upon national standards, but with the tools that they've put together and really looking at Midwest sectors, Midwest communities, what most municipalities are gathering and have within their community sector. I mean, I think we all felt very confident that we would get a good number related to that.
Well, the reason why I press into this a little bit, at some point, we're going to be developing policies based upon what this inventory says.
Mhm.
And we may be asking the community to make substantial changes.
Right.
And so it's imperative that as a council, we really do a deep dive on making sure that the underlying numbers that we're relying on are solid. And so this is beyond my pay grade. I just want to make sure, because you're sort of our expert that we look to, that the process of going through and creating a greenhouse gas inventory using this kind of methodology it represents the standard of care, the best practices for this area. Is that what you're telling the council?
Yes, and the tool that they have used, consistently to other communities. They spent a lot of time developing this tool, fine-tuning this tool. So yes, I think that to the best of what we saw from the vendors giving us information and based upon their track record, based upon the references that we spoke to, we feel very confident that this would give us a good picture upon which to make future decisions.
And we talk once in a while about margins of error. So do they discuss in maybe some of the other studies you looked at, they're going to give us this baseline, but is there a projected margin of error that's accompanied with this number?
I don't know that we talked about that. We
Okay.
can certainly.
The key
Ask
was
them.
for them to give us the yardstick to continue to measure against.
Right.
So we're using the same tools as we go along, and we want to see a reduction. So if there's a little give in the beginning, it'll be the same all the way throughout.
I was also intrigued with number 8, the renewable energy potential study,
Sure.
at being only $2,000. That seems like a very small amount. To the point that Allison Grundy made earlier about the goal of becoming 100% neutral by 2030, I actually talked with a fellow with the utilities in Dubuque. They have some pretty aggressive solar there. And he explained to me that 20% of the community would have to be covered with solar panels in order to just provide solar energy for the community. So this is a huge leap. We're going to shut down our natural gas energy production at some point. And if we were to go completely with solar and wind, that's an enormous change in the way in which we generate energy. And there's a lot to think about.
Very much so.
Well, that would be underneath the climate action plan, right? I mean, this is just doing an inventory.
This is setting a
what Tim was talking about
baseline
would be
so we know exactly where we are. I mean, we have different community sectors that have gathered different things. Iowa State, we gather, our stuff for our record keeping. We've never put it under a community umbrella. And we really want to get that baseline. And from there, then we're able to look at the planning, at the strategies, at the different opportunities.
Yeah, and I wasn't complaining about that price. I would be willing to see the city spend more money on this to have a more robust. I mean, I think this issue on the renewable energies potential is sort of the next step. And so it just seems like if you get what you pay for, we're not going to get a very robust analysis for $2,000. So maybe we take this first step and we see what they produce. But if we're really serious about moving the needle on this, then it seems like we'd have to have a more robust component of that.
Well, I think that does come into the planning pieces too. This is giving us some indication. Then that can come into, future planning on how much you want to build upon that.
Could I follow up with the question too? Just thinking about this, I see it in two different ways. First, it's nice to get an accurate measure of what the current greenhouse gas emissions are in absolute terms.
Right.
But it seems to me at least as important to just be able to do that consistently, even if exactly where we are on the thermometer isn't quite right, as long as we're using the same tool each time. That's what you were saying about the yardstick,
yes,
I think.
Yes.
And so this leads to my question. I see that the RFP refers to the ICLEI Global Protocol for
Sure.
Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions. And can you just confirm that the output, the deliverable we expect to get under this study is something that is sufficiently portable so that anyone we would then ask to do a climate action plan would be able to use that data pretty much as is? They know exactly what it is and they know how to work with it, right?
Correct. That was the intent of putting the RFP together the way that we did. We wanted that transferability in order to be able to move into signing on resolutions, whether or not you wanted to look at certifying the city, as a sustainable city at some point, or exactly as you mentioned, for planning purposes. We wanted to be able to be very flexible in that we were providing. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
So Mary, I guess this is related to Tim's question.
Sure.
Was there a big difference in the tools that these different companies were proposing to measure our greenhouse gases? We've got a huge range of cost, but
Yeah, I mean, there were some were doing much more estimating on some of the items based upon national averages. For the company that we're proposing here, they were looking at gathering absolutely as much as they could, and at the last need, looking at some estimation if we couldn't really get to those. There was also, we wanted to make sure that as applicable, we did look at agriculture. We're a big agriculture area. We did want to look at transportation because we have a lot of different transportation pieces in our community. And there were some of the respondents that were approaching those in different ways or really didn't even include them in some cases, saying that they thought they would be too cost prohibitive. And so that was something we really wanted to include. So there was quite a bit of difference. And in these additional optional pieces, this was the only vendor that offered either of those different options.
Thanks.
And I would say in some cases also some of the public education materials were optional add-ons rather than a piece of the package. And we thought that this vendor had some really exceptional ways of presenting information that we would be able to share with our community and really make this a community effort as we looked forward. And that was one of the pieces also that we thought was very important. And also we really liked the products that they had produced.
Other questions? All right, open up public comment. Is there anyone that wants to address council on this topic?
There are a couple of them over there.
If you could, limit your comments to 3 minutes.
One of those.
Pardon me?
Should I just
It's
wait?
okay. I'll write it down for you.
Okay, thank you. I apologize. Thank you for putting this together. It's very exciting. And, you know, when I was doing some personal research on what different communities were doing in Iowa, across the country, across the world, they're all using ICLEI. And that's like the standard that, I mean, I think that there may be one other version from the mayor's accord that kind of morphed into ICLEI, but this is the gold standard of measurement to be able to compare apples to apples across the board. And for a community to pick a date to say, this is where we are now, and then show progress and celebrate progress, you know, that is, you know, a big part of this process. And Mary, I missed it. Did you, or I forget where I thought I saw it, but something about that this company also was going to train and work with a ISU graduate student?
Oh, yes, that's a very good point. Thank you. One thing that we had included in the RFP was incorporating a connection to having student engagement. And Pale Blue Dot does have a graduate student that works with them on different assessments, and she is also currently an Iowa State graduate student. So we are excited about that. Yes.
And something about training maybe Ames staff to continue the
That's part of the RFP, is that we would have a tool for collection as well as we would be going through the entire process with them so that we can carry on that measurement on an ongoing basis. Yes.
And did they offer any like ongoing tech support questions, or like 2 years from now? Is that at all?
We didn't specifically ask
I
them
wondered
that,
if they might.
but they
Yeah.
completely understood that we wanted to take the ball and run with it.
Yeah.
And they are in this line of work. So I mean, it felt very comfortable.
That's great.
Right.
Thank you. And I love here too that they include the climate vulnerability assessment.
Yes.
That seems like it would be something very useful to think about. And, you know, I don't know about the prices, and maybe other people have thoughts about the $2,000 for the renewable energy portfolio study, but I certainly think here in Ames, there are a lot of different exciting things happening with renewable energy. Even, you know, I know that you all just signed sort of a guinea pig project with REG that's exciting, and
Yep.
people doing, you know, algae research at ISU. And so I don't know if they can factor all of that in, but I'd be very excited to hear what they have to put forward. So thank you for doing this. And I am super excited about council continuing to move forward with these efforts.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll close public input and council. For discussion or entertain the motion,
I'd move alternative one.
which is, for everyone's,
We approve the award of contract with Pale Blue Dot of Maplewood, Minnesota for a community greenhouse gas inventory forecasting and recommendations report in the amount of $24,960.
for a second.
Second.
Okay, and just for audience's information, if you're interested, that includes everything, including the climate vulnerability assessment and renewable energy potential study as part of that motion. Further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Thank you. And thank you, ladies. Appreciate your input very much. I had 2 cards here from some people that are interested in talking about an item which is actually on the it's actually on the disposition of communications to council. This is for Jamie Winters Hockey and Sid Barfoot. And because it's on a communications to council, there will not be any public input tonight if it does not move on into a future agenda. It dies. If it does go to a future agenda, then there will be public input at that time. But I just didn't want you to wait until the end of the meeting and find out that there was no public input. So for those 2 individuals that are here, we'd love to have you stay, but I just want you to know there will not be any public input on that item tonight. So. Okay, moving on. Move on to item 25, hearing on the 2018-19 consolidated annual performance and evaluation report in accordance with consolidated plan. Vanessa.
Good evening again. This is just our annual report that's due at the end of our program year. We did ask HUD for an extension to have it submitted by November 15th. That was due to the 5-year plan having to be pushed back as well. And just the council's overview and for the public, it's been out for public comment for the last 15 days that ended on the 7th. And it just talks about how much money we've spent over this past fiscal year, about $595,000 on the activities listed: rental affordability, affordable housing, disposition of property, and our neighborhood public improvements program on State Avenue. And so approximately $112,000 in administration for about a total of about just over $700,000 spent. Additionally, that doesn't include our GO bond funds that we use to match for our home grant. We have not spent any of that allocation yet this year. And then also for our home funds, we've only spent about $200, and that's just on administrative startups. So hopefully this next coming year we'll be able to carve a little bit more down on that. And so with that, unless you have some questions, that's our CAPER report.
Any questions for Vanessa?
Vanessa, did you receive any public input?
No, not through the comment period.
Okay.
Okay, I declare the public hearing on the 2018-2019 Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, also known as CAPER, in accordance with the consolidated plan to be open. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, close public hearing. Entertain motion on the approving 2018-19 CAPER plan.
Move alternative 1.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Roll call?
Aye.
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 Very good.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Vanessa. All right, item 26, hearing on vacation of the sanitary sewer easement located at 610 and 700 Southeast 16th. Any question for staff on this item? Okay, I declare the public hearing on the vacation of a sanitary sewer easement located at 610 and 700 Southeast 16th be open. Is there anyone who wishes to address council on this topic? Seeing none, close public hearing, entertain motion on resolution approving vacation of easement.
Move alternative 1.
Second.
Mayor, I feel like this is a good crowd tonight. We should have a robust fight over the vacation of the sanitary sewer easement. No?
Nope.
All right.
All right, roll call.
I tried.
Good try. Aye.
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 Thank you. Sorry to disappoint you, Tim. All right, item 27, hearing on Innis Grove Park restroom projects. Mr. Abraham.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. You have the report in front of you, just wanted to mention that, a couple of different alternatives. One, to just award the base bid. And when we put the bid out, priority was the new restroom. So we did that as the base bid. And then we did an alternate for the renovations to the restroom along Duff Avenue. With this, speaking with the architect, we did get 5 bids, which was very promising. The bids were very close in nature. And in talking with the architect as well, one of the things that they mentioned that if we were to rebid the restroom renovation at another time, we would most likely pay a higher cost, because if a contractor is doing both projects at the same time, they save on mobilization, and there's some efficiencies with doing that. So with all that, it's in the council action form. Staff's recommendation is to go with alternative number 2 and award the contract to HPC of Ames for the new restroom and the restroom renovation. And with this option, though, it would be also authorizing $72,000 to be used from the Park Development Fund, which is what we did with the Brookside restroom project. Mm-hmm. So I would answer any questions that council may have.
Do you anticipate a lot of people coming from elsewhere to visit our palatial restrooms when they're done? Now that we've got 2 flagship parks that would have fabulous new restrooms?
I think we may.
They'll come from far and wide. Yeah.
Any other questions for Keith? All right, I declare a public hearing on the Innis Grove Park restroom projects to be open. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, close public hearing, entertain a motion on resolution approving final plans, specifications, and awarding the contract to HPC LLC of Ames, Iowa for both the new restroom and renovated restrooms in a total amount of $378,000.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. And entertain a motion on resolution reallocating $72,420 from the Park Development or Local Option Sales Tax.
We're going
Fund.
to Park Development Fund.
Pardon me?
We want it for the Park Development Fund.
All right, let me strike that. We'll start over again.
That's good.
Resolution reallocating $72,420 from the Park Development Fund for this project.
So moved.
Second.
All right, discussion? Roll call?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, item 28, request from Ames Foundation for city to complete 3 city projects at a minimum cost of $525,000 by September 30th, 2021. Keith?
So with this one, the Ames Foundation did receive a CAT grant. They need to sign the agreement with IEDA by November 18th. And what they're looking for from council, which was spelled out in the staff report, they're just looking for some confirmation that city council will do the best efforts they can to accomplish the 3 projects that was listed in the overall Innis Grove Accessibility Improvement Project, which included the 2 restrooms, which council just approved to move forward with. The other item, the third item, was shared use path. There is shared use paths along 24th Street and Duff Avenue to improve accessibility. Right now, there's 2 bus stops that once you get off the bus, there is no way to get into the park. So these shared use paths will help with that. That is in the fiscal year 2021 CIP, which council will be allocating funding coming up here after the first of the year. So we can have the money in the CIP for that third project, and they're just, again, looking for us to do our best effort. Obviously, there is some risk as far as weather and contractor availability and things of that sort, that if they can get the projects done. One of the things that the foundation, has is if they don't complete all the projects by September 30th of 2021, they may have to pay back a portion of that CAT funding. And really with this is we've made it clear that the city of Ames would not be responsible for any of that payback, because we've done this whole project besides the funding for the design. All the other funding for this project has been raised by the foundation and other groups, which is over $2 million, and it's been a great thing. So with this, staff's recommendation is, option number one, to just give confirmation to the foundation that, we will do our best efforts to complete these projects by September 30th.
But can't assume the financial responsibility.
What was that?
But cannot assume any financial responsibility.
Correct.
For performance.
Yep.
Keith, could you clarify? I apologize, I may have missed this. The location of the multi-use trails would be where?
So they would be along 24th Street. So on the north side of 24th Street, which is part of the park, and then the east side of Duff Avenue. So really the way we've designed it with these shared use paths, what they would do is they would tie into the Miracle Park, the Miracle Field, and actually when it's all said and done, you would be able to have almost a half-mile loop through the park on the outside, and which would be a great thing for walking at any time throughout the year.
Oh, I apologize. So this is not to create connectivity towards the multi-use trails in general. This is within the park.
It's within the park, yes.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yep.
Other questions for Keith? I didn't see, I'm looking through the agreement between the Ames Foundation and the granting agency. I didn't see any mention of the 525. Is that just part of their application?
Yes.
Yes.
And so as part of the application, if we add the 378 that the council just awarded to HPC,
Yep.
can you also count the $32,000 that we are doing for restroom decommissioning and sewage lift station installation and the AE fees and soil testing to that total?
Yes. Yep. Because that's all part of that project as well.
Okay. So quick math, about $446,000 for that. So I was just trying to figure out if the 525, if the trail system only got half of that done, you'd still be very close to meeting that 525 commitment, or how's that work?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Right now we have 150,000 in the CIP for those trails, which based on what you just described and the trails, we would be over the 525.
Yeah, you'd be at almost $600,000.
Yep.
And just for as I think Steve just mentioned, and that is do our best efforts, but if we just can't get the trail done and we only spend the 446, Ames Foundation understands that we're not committing to doing the full 525. That becomes their situation with the grant.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not just 525, it's within the time frame too.
And a time frame too, correct, yes. But that's also, hopefully, that's a year, 2 years off. September 30th of 2021 is when it has to be done by. So, okay.
Yes.
Other questions for Keith? All right, open up to, is there any public comment on this particular item on the agenda? Seeing none, close public input, and I would entertain a motion on the request from Ames Foundation. And I think that recommendation from staff is option 1.
Correct.
Correct?
I would move option 1.
Okay.
Second.
All right, discussion? Hearing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining, motion carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yep, thank you. All right, moving on to item 29, resolution approving preliminary plat for Kingsbury subdivision, 3rd edition, 315 Southeast 3rd Street. Is there any question for staff? Oh, I
just want to clarify one thing.
Thank you.
As we discussed in the report, this is a commercial subdivision, and the applicant intends to seek a waiver or a deferral in the future for some of the public improvements. That didn't make it into alternative one, but wanted to make sure it was understood that you're not formally approving a waiver or deferral tonight, but we want to make sure that council is okay with the applicant proceeding so that they can spend time and we can spend time putting together that deferral agreement. So staff is recommending approval and at the same time looking for an indication that council will be willing to consider that deferral at the time of final plat. And what that was in regard to was we are planning for that Cherry Avenue extension just to the east of here and tying in the Southeast 3rd Street extension with the Cherry Avenue's construction really helps from the engineering side and maybe lower some future costs. And until that connectivity is created, we think the waiver standard could be met, but we'll look at that as part of the final plat decision.
So Kelly, are you asking that council would consider two motions? One be the resolution approving the preliminary plat, and then two is just giving you indication on deferral? Or
I would prefer a second motion, yes, as direct staff to work with the applicant on preparing a public improvement deferral agreement.
Okay, all right. Questions for Kelly?
Is the purpose of this for the street extension? I mean, the purpose for this whole division of property? I mean, it says that there's no development plans, no immediate development plans on the 2 lots that are being created.
But they're trying to create 2 saleable, buildable lots.
I see.
They're just saying they don't necessarily have
They don't have any plans.
a buyer in the
They
next,
want to, I see, that's to sell them off. Or
just to sell them off. Yeah.
And could you clarify, I know this is in the floodplain, right? So
Yes.
it is buildable as long as they elevate the floor elevation 3 feet above floodplain. Is that correct, Kelly?
Yep. So the current code requirement is, yes, the lowest floor has to be 3 feet above base flood elevation. Okay. So almost all of the site would require some fill to make it buildable for commercial use.
So floodplain, you can build on, floodway you cannot, correct?
Correct.
Following up on that, I'm not sure I have a lot of confidence in the base flood elevation measures. And this isn't really about this particular request. It's really about our code and the requirement to build 3 feet above the BFE when you're in the floodplain. My question is, what are the triggers that allow us to reconsider whether we have the right standard for that in the long run, since we've seen so much more flooding activity than is predicted by the BFE?
So so the 3 feet is our own local standard. The city council, I believe in 2014, looked through the flood mitigation study information that we had taken on as the city in response to the 2010 floods, and it kind of evaluated a number of different scenarios. And the council at that time did have a workshop to discuss what are some of the mitigation measures that do exist, other things out there besides what we do. And at that point in time, there was no direction to change. The 3 foot standard was roughly equal to a 500-year flood event. That had been in the Duff Avenue area anyways. That was working in terms of protecting property, which was the intent of our ordinance. So if council wanted to look at different floodplain standards, they would have to have a referral and we'd have to go back to do a workshop. The other time that we looked at this was in, I can't recall the year, about 3 years ago, council did adopt a floodway overlay, and no longer can you do any development in the floodway without council approval, which takes out parking lots and other kind of grading activities without at least a council review to try and mitigate any potential environmental degradation or impacts from work in a floodway. So those are the 2 things in the last 5 years council has looked at, is just general development standards and then putting more protection measures on the floodway.
Kelly, is the federal standard that only requires 1 foot?
And really, it's not necessarily even that. It's just above the flood, the base flood elevation.
We're more conservative than most cities.
Yeah, we're much more conservative.
And they set the base flood elevation.
So they set the actual base flood elevation. And if you haven't been following our updates and our monthly highlights, right now, citywide, Iowa DNR is going through with FEMA and updating the maps for the floodplains across the city. That, for the most part, if not all of it, is in response to changes in the topography. So they're updating the terrain model for the flooding events that they model. They're not necessarily changing what the flood events are. They're changing what the ground is that they're evaluating off of. So there are changes to the floodplains coming up. You will be asked here in the next year to adopt those new maps so that we can stay within the flood insurance program requirements. The only reason that we have to have flood zoning standards is so that we can be a participant in flood insurance program. If we didn't have that, we can't we can't be part of that program, and that wouldn't be good for our citizens.
When you say base level, you mean 100-year flood? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
And then what is the comparable, the 3 feet above? You know what that's comparable
It's
to?
in the South Duff area, it's roughly a 500-year flood. It's not a direct relationship like that. When we did that analysis for the flood mitigation study, that's kind of what we resolved out of that, looking at a number of different storms, was roughly that equivalency.
Well,
And just one final follow-up here. And again, I think you said that the purpose of our ordinance and our choice of the 3 feet is to protect property that is within that area, right? It is not intended to incorporate, say, downstream effects or that sort of thing.
So that's where it starts to get a little more involved in explaining how the standards are first established, but the fill of the floodplain is contemplated to create that base flood elevation.
Yep.
Our standard, though, is to protect property and investment that occurs within that modeled scenario of fill happening and development happening in the floodplain.
Okay, thank you.
So along those lines, I appreciate you bringing this up. One of the benefits that we have seen on a number of properties is when they've developed, we've actually improved the way in which surface water moves in Ames. We've got a number of examples of this. And so if people are under the impression that just because we approve this preliminary plat, that somehow that necessarily means there's going to be a degradation of the surface water system, it's sort of the opposite. We'll be able to make requirements in terms of the way surface water is stored on the property and moves. Well, that should improve the flow of water. So I think it's important people track with that. You agree with that, Kelly?
I think it's a really broad statement, so I don't know that I can agree that
may improve.
I like that broad statement,
but
isn't it? But we've had a number of situations like that where we've been able to improve.
I think it depends
Well, I
on.
think
South Duff
there's-
isn't a good
I
example.
think it's the circumstance where in the floodplain.
There's water
that is.
that falls on land and being able to control that before it goes in the river. But then there's the separate issue of once the river's already over its banks where the water goes.
Correct.
And the amount of holding ponds they have in that circumstance doesn't matter.
Correct.
Yep.
That's fair.
Okay. Any other questions?
Kelly, I see a note under streets that we would not be recommending the dedication of right-of-way for Second Street at this time. And there's some notes there about acquiring more right-of-way along South Bourne would be an extensive process with neighboring property owners. So if this property gets developed, does that automatically mean at that point that we do extend Second and we do look at extending Bourne and acquiring the right-of-way?
I would say no. So normally the first look at needed right of way and public improvements is through subdivision. So staff is recommending that Bourne Avenue does not actually go through, and why I put the plat up on the screen so you can see it's a little tough, but here's the contour lines. And for us to take or require the developer to take Second Street across and then find a way to tie into Bourne and make a viable circulation system, we believe that wasn't anticipated, nor is it necessary to require that. So if we're not going to do it with the subdivision, and unless dramatic circumstances change, when they build a building here, they would not trigger a Second Avenue extension. So if for some reason things didn't build here for a long time and we made other improvements in the area and we thought it was viable to make that extension, then the missing infrastructure ordinance could require it. But if circumstances don't change, it would not.
Okay.
As South Third goes east, is there an overall plan in terms of another outlet, Kelly, in terms of what or where that might go, or what thoughts do you have from a city planning standpoint?
So the current project in the CIP is the Cherry Avenue extension. So Cherry Avenue is over in this area here.
Yep.
You can see my cursor coming down.
Yep.
It is going to come down and connect to Third. It's planned to connect to Southeast Third and Southeast Fifth. And that's the extent of the project.
Which is that one that goes north of Walmart and south of Target.
So Southeast Fifth is between Target and Walmart.
Yep.
And that's the main extension that's going to happen with Grand Avenue to take that over and connect to Grand Avenue, and then would come through here and have another kind of outlet to the east side of the development.
That wouldn't go any farther south, though. That would just.
It would not. We end up going in. it's not planned as a city project
Yeah.
because there's no further connectivity that can happen to the south unless you're going to go all the way down to Southeast 16th Street. There's no other roadways, and we don't, and our traffic analysis and models don't show any benefit to that kind of project.
Will be interesting to see as we talk about infill with the Ames 2040 plan and see if there's any opportunities, there in that conversation, if that would be something, really long term that might be of benefit.
So that'll be something for you to talk about. To this point, this is a side note to the project. Obviously,
Right.
it's about
And, yeah, we've
2040.
gone well astray of the.
We've tried to stay out of the floodplain for any assumed infill. So when you get to that conversation on
Okay.
infill, you might want to look at this area again.
Okay. All right. I'll open up public comment on this item. Is there anyone who wants to address the council on this topic tonight?
Good evening. Scott Renault, Fox Engineering, representing DET Land Company. I'm just here to answer questions if you have any, but we're satisfied with staff alternative number one.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Renault?
Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. Any other public input? Seeing none, close public comments. Council entertain a motion on resolution approving preliminary plat for Kingsbury subdivision, 3rd edition.
So moved. Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
And then Kelly, would you share again what?
Yeah, I would appreciate a motion that says direct staff to work with the applicant on preparing infrastructural deferral agreement.
Is there a motion to that effect?
Would move that as well.
Second.
All right. Move a second. Discussion, comments? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Motion carried.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Next item is the first passage of ordinance regulating massage establishments. We did get a phone call from Dr. Blitzos, and he is planning on coming and he wants to give input. I don't see him in the audience yet, but he's been integral to this overall ordinance. So I would just ask council if we could go ahead and move on to item 31. We'll come back to item 30 after Dr. George gets here, if that's acceptable to you. And he can be here for the whole conversation. All right. Item 31, entertain a motion to postpone third passage of adoption of ordinance rezoning with master plan property 507 Lincoln Way from downtown Gateway Commercial to Highway Oriental Commercial. You all got the email from the applicant, and they're still waiting to get a signed agreement on, as council requested. That was a contingent for rezoning. They're still waiting to get the final order.
There was an email from the applicant other than what's in the packet?
Came in this afternoon. It was from Mr. Winkleblack.
Thank you.
He said he was still working. They're very, very close, but they still don't have it, and they're respecting the fact that council's motion to rezone this property was subject to having a signed agreement that this is where Starbucks is going to be being relocated.
So no real change from what's in the packet. It's just an email along the
Right.
same line. Okay.
Yep. Yes, thank you, David. Is there a motion? Postpone third passage?
So moved?
Second.
All right. Those in favor say, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
I'm going to abstain from this one.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Sorry, one time I didn't ask. All right. Okay, item 32, ISU Research Park Urban Renewal Area. Third passage and adoption, and then I think Mark, you need you to come up
Mark
too
will
on
be
this
there.
one as well too, so.
So we can move on 32A without,
Yep.
right, okay, so I would move 32A, third passage of ordinance 4396.
Second.
Which correcting boundaries of tax increment financing district number 1. Yes, all right. Discussion, roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, thank you. All right. Mark, we need a motion to amend the ordinance. So would you
Right.
please explain?
Because we needed to get this process started to have the ordinance in place before December. So we started it with the best legal description we had. We knew we were going to change that. Part of what you did earlier tonight was approve the plat, and that affected the legal description. And so instead of just the, go this far, go the meets and bounds description, it had, plot A of whatever, I don't have it in front of me, but so it changed the legal description. We kind of knew from the beginning that we'd have to change the legal description before the end of this. So we just need a motion to approve to amend the ordinance to change it to the new legal description that's in the version that you got with the packet.
So what's in the council packet is the correct legal description, which has been
The one that came in the
substituted for what
council
was-
packet this time, yeah. So it's the legal description for the urban renewal area.
That's the only change.
That's the only change.
Okay.
So I would move that we amend the ordinance to reflect the description of urban renewal area that was in the version in our packets.
Second.
All right, discussion? Roll call.
Nelson.
Aye.
Katie Hansen.
Aye.
Corey. Aye. Betcher.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Burton.
Aye.
And entertain a motion on third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4397, creating tax and financing district number 2.
Move on third.
Second.
All right, discussion? Roll call.
Katie Hansen.
Aye.
Corey. Aye. Betcher.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Burton.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Very good. All right, moving on to item 33, third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4398, amending chapter 29 to establish definitions, standards, and enforcement procedures for licensing of guest lodging in specified zoning districts.
Move on third reading.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Corey. Aye. Betcher.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Burton.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Katie Hansen.
Aye.
Okay, item 34, third passage and adoption ordinance number 4399, amending chapter 13 rental code to establish definitions, standards, and enforcement procedures for licensing of guest lodging in specified zoning districts.
Move on third.
Second.
Okay, discussion? Roll call.
Betcher.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Burton.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Katie Hansen.
Aye.
Corey. Aye.
Okay, under this one, we also need an amendment. And Mark, I think Jane caught something here, and so we want to, before we get into item 35A and B, we need to actually insert another amendment.
Yeah, it's a very simple amendment, and it's 35.600, which is the appeals process, and was originally written with 31 days, and we just want to change that to 30 days. So
again, the ordinance is in the council packet, says 30 days, but the council needs a motion to amend the ordinance to indicate appeal period is 30 days, not 31 days.
Yes.
So I need a motion to amend ordinance to indicate appeal period is 30 days, not 31.
Second. Or so moved, I mean.
Second.
Yeah, that's.
Discussion? Let's do roll call on that.
Martin.
Aye.
Burton.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Katie Hansen.
Aye.
Corey. Aye. Betcher.
Aye.
Okay, then we entertain motion on third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4400, creating chapter 35 to establish definitions, standards, and enforcement procedures for licensing of guest lodging in specified zoning districts.
Move on third.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Burton.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Katie Hansen.
Aye.
Corey. Aye. Betcher.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
And entertain a motion on resolution setting the fee at $50 for guest lodging licensure.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Nelson.
Aye.
Katie Hansen.
Aye.
Corey. Aye. Betcher.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Burton.
Aye.
Burton.
Okay. Item 36, third passage and adoption ordinance number 4401, revising the age limit restriction and contract rezoning agreement for 415 Staten.
Move on third.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Katie Hansen.
Aye.
Corey. Aye. Betcher.
Aye.
Aye.
Burton.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Okay, well, we'll move back up to item number 30, and we're going to proceed with discussion.
Okay, I'll start. So, I just want to start off by saying that we can't do first passage tonight, and that's because my office failed to put the ordinance into your packet. And you didn't get it. It was a fact I didn't discover until about 5:30 tonight. So typically my process is on the Friday before a council meeting, I have my staff identify on the agenda everything that we've worked on, and I go through each item and double check and make sure we've done our work. Occasionally I don't get that done on Friday and I do it on Monday. So I didn't get it done Friday. There was no Monday. I looked at it off and on today and found it about 5:30 after about 10 minutes of trying to figure out what happened. There really wasn't time to get it prepared for the meeting, and I can only apologize for that. It's just, my mess up. So I own that and just want to be upfront with you. I know there are people here looking to comment and there are, differences of opinion on what should be in the ordinance. So maybe it's for the best that if there are changes to the ordinance, we can come back with a clean version for first reading for next time.
But the ordinance before them reflects the previous direction, right?
Yeah, and there is an ordinance in your packet, but it has comments from the massage therapist in it. And so I think that was part of the confusion that happened here, that there's an ordinance there. It just wasn't the final ordinance in ordinance format. So,
But it gives
again,
an
I
indication
apologize.
what the ordinance would look like, correct?
Right. But it is the language that we had drafted.
So then if we have recommendations for things to change, I can base it off of this
Yes. Right.
draft ordinance.
Right.
packet.
So it'd just be a motion
Right.
to, change it, and it wouldn't actually be an amendment to it because we're not doing
Okay.
first reading.
Got it.
So the draft that's in your packet reflects the 6 specific pieces of direction that you gave us at the last meeting where we discussed this ordinance. And then following that, the drafting of it, we submitted the draft to massage therapists and George, representing anti-human trafficking advocates, and asked for their comments or concerns. And that is what you have in your packets. We have some comments from various massage practitioners, and we have comments from George and his group.
Well, given council's commitment to wanting to go through this process, I think it was actually, no harm, no foul from the standpoint that we really wanted to have this conversation first so that you have direction and we have gotten public input first, and then we can do the first reading, still have public input in that first reading, but that way we're not doing the first reading and trying to do wordsmithing up front. So appreciate, owning up to it. And like I said, no harm, no foul tonight, and we'll have a good conversation, I think. Okay, so council, what questions or comments do you have for staff to begin with? Then we'll open up public input.
I have a comment, and that is, if we go back to the last time we discussed this, it was my motion to require the photo to be displayed both in the waiting area and in the practitioner rooms. And we've got some feedback on that, obviously, in the attachment. And thinking about this, I'm planning, after other input, to make a motion to simplify that, to have them be on display somewhere in the establishment. That's my thinking. I think also the 35 square inch requirement is maybe bigger than it needs to be, and we could look at making that smaller. That's kind of what I'm thinking going forward.
I'm wondering what difference it makes in the purpose section if we have the clause that says which may include prostitution and or human trafficking as a follow-up to involved in illegal activities. It seems like illegal activities is very broad and it encompasses prostitution and human trafficking.
I'm not sure it makes much difference in the enforcement of it. It simply was language that was in the Des Moines ordinance that we copied.
And similar to that, Gloria, in that same paragraph, I was just curious about, after the words, the very last line says, and welfare of the city and negatively impacting the massage therapy profession, which seems to be a little out of character for an ordinance. I mean, we're just trying to set forth policy, right? Versus having, that's kind of like an opinion. Not that we don't agree with that opinion, but is it appropriate to be in an ordinance? I look to you, Mark, for maybe your input on
Yeah,
that.
and we put the statement of purpose in there. We generally don't do that in
Okay.
our ordinances, and Des Moines does that regularly.
Gotcha.
Every ordinance has a statement of purpose at the beginning. Just given the nature of this, we thought it might make sense to put it in there, and but it's actually you could delete that whole first paragraph, and we still have the ordinance. It's just a statement of purpose.
So one option would be is striking first paragraph purpose and starting out with definitions, then you're saying.
Yeah.
The value of the purpose is if it helps our city attorney, if there's ever a dispute over the intent that we have, it just sort of clarifies this is our intent. So it's
Doesn't
really
hurt
just giving
anything.
them ammunition.
I really appreciate the fact that we had public input and people took time to respond back and in writing, and also the email as well too. So this is encouraging to see those who are going to be affected by it being engaged in the conversation as we're going through it. So, any other questions for staff before we open up public input? Okay, I have two cards, and Dr. George, so you came too. We'll call on you next. We'll start with Doug Dollison.
Thank you to the council for your time.
I'm sorry, would you introduce yourself, name
Yes.
and address, please, and then go ahead.
Yes, Doug Dollison. I'm at 1018 Northeast Fountain View in Ankeny, Iowa, and we have a small business at 637 Lincoln Way, the Massage Heights there.
Thank you.
So again, I just have a few brief comments. I think first off, just appreciate the time and the opportunity to look at this. I think the state and the licensing does a nice job of laying out protection of the industry and massage professionals. However, they don't always have the enforcement capability. And then in the community, we've seen that we're able to identify issues in that, but haven't had the ability to act on those. So I think this does a great job of closing that gap and really protecting the profession. So definitely supportive of that. I just wanted to address, and I believe my comments are in the notes that you have, but a few points that have come up already. We have eight rooms and around 14 therapists. So one issue was just the postings, and all of these are operational issues. But I added up about 126 licenses and photos and things that we would have to have in the waiting area and each of the treatment rooms if we had to have 14 photos and 14 licenses in each room as well as in a waiting area. So a first suggestion was just having in some public area or some easily visible, accessible area, having those licenses posted. And the photographs, as they were mentioned, I think just having a smaller size. We actually had a concern from our therapist team about creating a non-professional atmosphere. If you imagine having a book of professionals that you sort through, you don't typically do that with your doctors or with other kinds of professionals. So making sure that it is serving the intent of identifying the licensed professional as who we think they are, but not becoming something else that would be more negative. So those were a couple of issues. The other was just to have, if possible, a grace period or a correction period of a business day or two if an issue comes up, and that's related to Section 8. I imagine this won't be an issue, understanding kind of the focus and target of the ordinance, but if there is some misunderstanding, clerical error, or that there's a day or so before any kind of placard or business closing would happen to allow those kinds of corrections that are more innocent to be taken care of. And for me, I believe that covers the issues we had. Again, I appreciate the council looking at this and just helping support the professionalism of the team that we have and of the licensed massage community. Thank you.
Before you go, do you have I think Councilman Martin's gonna make a motion. If you're given the option where to display license and the photo, you're fine with that. Then that just gives you can determine if you want it to be in the lobby or in the therapy room. I think we talked to Chief Sykosh this afternoon, and he said as long as it was in the premises, and available, that was
Right.
on a wall somewhere, essentially.
Definitely. And I think for me, I would think for the intent of the ordinance to have it in a publicly accessible location versus for us, a treatment room is after you've kind of said, I'm going to have a service here. I'm going to go back
Right.
down the hallway into a treatment room. So either for us, our lobby or a hallway, but I think to have it publicly available in an accessible, visible area. And also, you reminded me, but thinking about mobile massage or other models that are different than what we do, being able to explain how that would work. So if someone's doing mobile massage, how do they do the equivalent of us having it posted on the wall so that there's a similar outcome that way?
So to draft the ordinance, it would be your preference to say, again, your comments should be displayed in a public area and not defined in a customer waiting area, just given
Just for us,
the option would be preferred from that standpoint.
Yes, I think public, easily accessible area. So, for us, it's a lobby or a hallway, but I know for some, they may have a kind of a stall that's all one room, but as long as it's publicly visible and in one spot. Yeah. And we do that now with our licenses, but to add the photos would be no problem.
And I think they'll probably maybe ask Chief on the 24-hour delay and get his input towards the end before we get there. So,
right.
I think given the fact that this has got a little bit of a working session, any questions for Doug?
Okay. Yeah, and hopefully that made sense. I think that's just the day or two delay is the way I think of it. I guess if I'm someone that's not following the law, having a day or two, I'm not going to be able to get myself licensed. In that time, I'm still going to have an issue. But if it was simply a clerical error, a day gives me time to not have a illegal activities placard that was because of a miscommunication or an issue that could quickly be fixed.
Okay.
So thank you.
All right. Thank you. Michelle?
Hello, Council and Mayor again. I just mostly wanted,
sorry.
I'm sorry, Michelle DeMarie,
Address?
4933 Utah Drive.
Great. Thank you.
I'm owner of Healing with Heart Massage Therapy. I'm a sole practitioner here in Ames, so I have a little bit different model than Doug's operations, of course. So thank you so much for the hard work on the ordinance. I personally didn't have a lot of issues or feedback, but I did want to go ahead and collect what I did hear from the other. We have a private Facebook group for the Ames LMTs, and that gives us the opportunity to share ideas and feedback and questions about the ordinance. And I do want to relay that I heard from very, very few. So I take that as good news. But Doug and Amy, his wife, were two of that gave some really great constructive feedback, I felt. For me personally, since I am a sole practitioner, there's myself and I know a few others that work out of our private residences. So the issue with displaying the license and the picture, I don't really have a waiting area. So I would assume that my treatment room, which honestly is not going to be readily visible, but if I'm in there with somebody, then they're not going to be coming in to view it anyway. So there's a little, some of us have different business models. So, but I would assume that under the provision that as long as we display our license and our picture in our treatment rooms, that, for those of us that don't really have a waiting area, because my clients are led right back into my treatment room. So I wanted to clarify that. Also, I offered, along with the feedback, I just wanted to clarify our certificates, our license certificates do not have an expiration date on them. And I wanted to make sure that was very clear. We are issued little wallet cards upon renewal. We received 2 of them from the state of Iowa. So what most of us do is we display that renewal that has our expiration date very clearly. So I don't know if that would need to be included in the description, display of license and proof of expiration date. I don't know if you would want to include that specific verbiage, but that was just one other little detail that I wanted to be sure to offer that might be helpful for, the chief and his staff to know if they do have to go in and look at that proof. So But thank you again. This is exactly what we were all hoping for. And I just wanted to provide the collective feedback. Didn't necessarily all of it, represent my personal views, but it did save Brian from possibly getting 20 emails. So I wanted to just collect everything in one. And then I did invite other LMTs here to make sure if they felt strongly about anything in the ordinance that I made it very clear what the process is, and this is their time to speak to it. So yeah, I was pleased that we didn't have, a lot of feedback, to be honest. So I feel that's implied support. So
You did make a comment about the size of the photograph. I think that was suggested like a 5x7, which I think at least some conversation we had, we would agree it seems a little large, but a 4x3 or a 4x6, which is something you can get from a regular, photograph. That's kind of the leaning. Would that be acceptable? You mentioned passport, but that seems awfully small.
that is a little bit small. And that came from a couple of LMTs who unfortunately were not able to be here. They just questioned this. So I think if it could be reduced a little bit, that would be more acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah. But thank you so much for your receptiveness.
Well, thank you
and
for
You've
helping me
been
on
wonderful to work with through this whole process. I can't thank you enough. So
Thank you, Michelle.
thank you.
George Belitzos, 5508 West Lincoln Way, Ames. I'm here this evening as the chair of the board of the directors of the Iowa Network Against Human Trafficking and Slavery. I am also speaking on behalf of Access, YSS, ISU Students Against Human Trafficking, Teens Against Human Trafficking, which has a chapter at Ames High School, and Protecting Our Children. We support the ordinance as written. We are very grateful that the council has taken the action of having the staff draft the ordinance. We thank the staff for responding to all the requests that we felt needed to be there to protect our citizens and to fight human trafficking in our community. We, if you saw the comments, you'll see that we would be okay with some of the changes that the massage therapists are requesting. Some we were not supportive of making a change. We would support it the way it's written right now. But for example, David mentioned that he's going to propose an amendment. We would support that amendment where you don't have to have two photos up. But others we felt should be kept for the integrity of the protecting our citizens. Just a quick update. When we were here last before you, you gave us a lot of time and we heard from the public. 10 massage therapists spoke in favor of having an ordinance. You have tremendous community support and interest in this. Since then, at that time, there were 15 ordinances in Iowa. There are now 23. We've made a lot of progress in the last year since the first of the year. There have been 9 convictions of traffickers, all getting long jail sentences. Over the summer, these 5 individuals have not stood trial yet. There were 5 Eastern Iowa arrests and charges of trafficking, and 4 of the 5 were trafficking minors. And there have been over 30 massage businesses since ordinances started going into effect that have been closed. There have been nearly 24 women that have been rescued. Unfortunately, of all those traffickers charged that I just spoke about, Only one of them was charged for the trafficking he was doing out of a massage business. Even though many have been closed, it is very hard to find the trafficker. But we're at least getting these places closed. So I thank you. It's been 2 years that we've been hoping that we would get to this day. We're very pleased that we're finally there.
Couple questions for you. One is you, can I go through your comments? Just have a couple questions for you.
Yes.
With one suggestion had been to strike, which may include prostitution and or human trafficking from the purpose statement. And you disagreed with striking that. Could you explain why?
I think that it's important that we look back at this ordinance and remember that this is what the violation of the law that really brought us here for you. I think it's important to leave it in.
Okay. And then do you have a comment on the 24-hour grace period, Mr. Dollison?
Yeah.
Can you just kind of maybe talk about that for a second?
We would not support taking that out.
Your concern and the reason for that?
In that 24 hours, things could be hidden. People could be in another state. We'd like...
Y'all shut down quickly.
Yes.
Okay. You got questions for? Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to address council on this topic? Typically no, but we'll go ahead and I'll make an exception tonight. Since Mr. Councilman Garten wanted to shake things up, I'll just go ahead and shake it up.
Yeah. I don't know as much. That was the sewage issue. I don't know as much about that, but just wanted to come up and just clarify, or maybe if it was a point that could help. I think with the grace period, if there's a way to have that as a procedural issue for, there's a checklist in the ordinance of information that needs to be collected and I definitely would have no concerns with, or would not want any delay on criminal activity or anything like that. But if it's a matter of record keeping of, has a manager changed at a location, or is there a new therapist and a chief of police showed up the day someone was hired, it's literally just timing issues like that. So if we know that, if someone's on staff, that what is the procedure in the ordinance that information gets to the city, if there's an allowance for that to happen, that's reasonable. That's more what I would ask for. If there's a lack of clarity on the small wallet size license versus the full size license, some allowance for that so that we don't have a placard that says illegal activity happening at someone's home or their business when it's an issue of clerical kinds of things. But definitely do not want to delay any kinds of action on criminal activity and would have no concern with that at all.
Okay.
So.
Some of this has got to be, we have to allow some
Discretion
kind of discretion to the police department.
Yeah.
And so, and it would also not surprise me if after a year or two of having this in place, the chief might come back and say, we recommend a couple of adjustments so that we know what the rules are. So I'm pretty comfortable leaving it flexible right now.
Yeah, that's what I had in mind.
And that was my question for Mark is, can they be like at the discretion of the police? Is that, or is that just?
It already is.
It's already in there.
Yeah.
They
A
should-
plaque. See,
they're empowered.
I'm just so good at that. It's just, I knew it was there.
So thanks for the
All
chance
right.
to clarify.
All right, very good. Any other comments? All right, close public input. Further questions, comments? Any questions for Chief?
I have a question for the chief. This is regarding the size of the photos. It seems to me that you have to approach the license to look at it to determine the information on it. So do we really need photos that are larger than a passport size?
We need a photo to give us a beginning place in relating the individual to the license. So it probably doesn't need to be 35 square inches, but we'd like it to be something larger than a driver's license photo. So the ranges you're talking about, 2x3, 3x5, even 4x6 are certainly adequate for our purposes. We aren't going to rely entirely on the photo to make that determination. It's a beginning point to say this person and this license seem to go together. And then our responsibility will be to take the next step and determine who is this person. And then, and maybe to reassure Doug a little bit, I mean, the swift and sure action of the police department is kind of an impressive image in that, but honestly, we will have to investigate, right? This is an area of licensing where we don't have regular daily expertise. If you look at provision, section 8, special provisions, really what the ordinance allows us to do is apply a penalty if someone is operating unlicensed. And a clerical violation of this ordinance, failure to promptly post a new picture, I'm not sure those are going to stand up as full-blown legal violations where we're going to justify a placard. So maybe to reassure Doug and the therapist a little bit that there is a process here of verifying that we have a substantial violation is likely to occur. The photograph is one piece that will take us down that path. A little bigger than a passport might be helpful, but we certainly don't need to go to the big portrait size photos that we started with here. Give us a beginning point, a reasonable rendition of the person who's standing there, and we'll take it from there.
And is it important for us to have the proof of expiration of the license or not?
As I stand here today, my guess is no. We want to see the license, and if we're far enough into this that we have some suspicion that this person is unlicensed or is not the person demonstrated on the license, we'll have to go beyond just that image of the card in pursuing that investigation. So we'll be in touch with the state. We'll be looking at the actual status of their license with the state and frankly verifying their identity. So we'll have more work to do. If we have the license and we have the person and everything looks good, then we're out the door. But if it's more than that, then we have work to do far beyond just looking at that card.
I think that the benefit, though, as a person who's licensed with the state of Iowa to practice, engineering, we do get, and they were saying, you do get a card.
Yeah.
And I think that it just shows that you're still active and that it's not something that's being photocopied and being, stolen from somebody else, and you have some kind of imposter as well too. It's actually a check by the state to give that as well too. And I don't think it's a big deal in my opinion, to have that stuck on the certificate frame. A lot of doctors' offices or other places, they have them. It's just stuck there as well too. So
yeah, and certainly we welcome any additional information that the business would like to provide to us in the course of that investigation would be helpful. We're just not going to rely on it.
No, I understand. Yeah. And Michelle brought up the point about in a home, putting the certificate, the license and the frame in the therapy room. You have any comment on that one way or the other versus being in a more public area?
I really don't. I think most of our work in this area is going to be complaint driven. I think having an expectation that the therapist will be licensed and be able to show proof of licensure and proof of identity to us is what we would need to follow up on a complaint under this ordinance.
And the last question I have is, I think someone mentioned, maybe it was Michelle, the portable, are there people that go around and do massage therapy, have a massage table, will travel, whatever? And so is that any concern in terms of, or they just have to, if they're doing it, that they have to have a current license on their person essentially and a photo ID to show it's them. That would be the best way of doing it.
You are out of my league. Here. At the outset here, we are not in the business regulation environment. It's not something we're good at and set up for. And so we'll have to learn about that. And, maybe in a year or two, if we've encountered this, I'll have better answers to your question. But at this point, it's uncharted territory for us.
And Chief, a question. Just following up on our conversation from earlier today, and given what we've all heard tonight, would the police department support changing the photo display requirement to simply require that a photo corresponding with the license be on display somewhere in the establishment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think that's perfectly satisfactory to us.
Other questions for Chief? Thank you. And Mark, I have a question on item 9, penalties. It says a violation under this section is declared to be a municipal infraction punishable by civil penalty for a person's first violation and a civil penalty for each repeat violation. Is that person the person who is actually owns the business, or is that person, would that person be the person who's practicing massage therapy?
It could be either under this.
Is there a need to clarify that, or is that the way it's normally written in terms of, and so it can be levied against either person?
Yes.
You want the flexibility to do that. Okay. Any other questions, council, for staff? Otherwise, we can move on to some recommendations and motions.
Well, I guess I'd like a little bit more clarity on the purpose statement. Mark, since your office would be the one charged with dealing with this ordinance, is it important to you to have that purpose statement there?
Brian and I talked about this at the beginning, the purpose statement. And like I said, that, I know he had sort of pulled some ordinances together and into a draft and sent it to us to look at. And that included this purpose statement, and Brian said to me at the time, I don't know if we want to do that or not. We don't typically do that. And I said, yeah, I know that's a thing. I've looked at Des Moines ordinances in the past, and I don't know if they do it on every single ordinance, but they do it a lot. And so I put it in just because it seemed like it might be a good idea for this particular ordinance, given the nature of it. I don't feel strongly about that. And, I think if we go to do a prosecution under this, that sends a message to the judge as to what this ordinance is about and why we're doing it. So we can show that to the judge. And so it may be some value that way. But I don't feel strongly about it.
So to follow up on that, do you have an opinion on prosecution and whether or not to strike which may include prostitution and or human trafficking? Does that have an impact one way or the other?
I don't think it would have an impact one way or the other. Just legally, I don't really have an opinion on it.
Okay. Can I make a motion?
You betcha.
Okay. I would move to modify the ordinance photo display requirement so that it requires the photos for the practitioners to be with their license on display somewhere in the establishment.
And you're not going to set a size?
Second motion. That'll be a different motion.
I'll second.
All right, second. Gloria, you got a second? All right. Any discussion?
So does that provide, I like that, but does it provide enough guidance? My fear then is that is the photograph going to be put in a place where it's not readily apparent? I mean, if you're just saying anywhere on the premises,
The photo needs to be on display corresponding with the license. And that has to happen somewhere in the premises.
Okay. But not in, say, the electrical closet. I think that's where Tim is.
Yes.
Conspicuous.
Oh,
so you say in plain view
on display. That's.
I'm sure when it comes,
The police will find them in the electrical closet.
It's really about giving the police the tools they need for investigation. That's why I phrased it that way.
All right. Any comments? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried.
And I would move to reduce the size requirement to, it's 4 by 6, 24 square inches.
Second.
Discussion?
Amendments?
So,
I'd like to see it a little smaller.
Smaller.
yes,
I agree.
I would too.
All right.
4 by
We want to amend the motion or you
I can withdraw if someone else wants to try.
withdraw it?
I do.
I would move that we ask for a 2 by 3 photograph.
Second.
Discussion? Those in favor
And
say aye.
this is bigger than a passport photo, is that right?
Yeah, it's probably twice the size.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
least.
Bigger.
Okay, good.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
I would move that we strike from the purpose statement everything after illegal activities.
Second.
So, okay. Discussion?
And,
I wouldn't-
and the reason for that,
I think that the therapists make a good point about defining the purpose statement and associating legitimate business owners with specific types of illegal activity.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So the inclusion of, but also conducting various types of illegal activity is implicit, just kind of giving a negative connotation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. It's a little redundant to go on to say the sort of illegal activity that could
Right.
be. I don't think it will actually change the
No, I don't think so.
business profile in any way.
No.
Um, is there any other reference in here to
Well-
human trafficking or?
So do you say, so you strike it after involved in illegal activities?
Correct. Yeah.
So you still would have the illegal,
What?
you still have illegal activities in the paragraph?
Yeah, just that
Correct.
and nothing
Okay.
else. Yeah.
But there is no other reference to human trafficking, right? In this draft ordinance.
I don't believe so.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried. Any other changes?
I just have a question about hold on, I gotta find the section. The designated manager, how does that apply to a sole proprietor or, just who, are they just designating themselves? What,
Yeah, I think. a sole
does that need to
proprietor
be
just does-
defined? It just seems, I don't know, maybe it doesn't matter, but
I think.
Well, that's a
It
good
would
point
make
because it
sense
actually, it does say it has to be displayed in the
In the-
customer waiting area.
right. It seems very specific to an actual business location where there's going to be a waiting room and multiple therapy rooms and that sort
Right.
of thing.
So
So,
could it be a requirement if there's more than one
Yeah.
right.
therapist?
I'm just not sure you need a designated manager if you're a sole proprietor.
Right.
Doesn't really make sense.
Or you are the
Or-
designated.
or would you
vendor,
have
sort
a
of by
sole-
default.
By default, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
how
you
I
just
see it.
exempt the sole proprietor.
I don't
if-
have
if-
an opinion necessarily on the exact verbiage, but
Right, but if you wanted to exempt sole
Yeah.
practitioners from that, and I mean, they still have to post their license
Exactly.
photo.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
yeah,
But it eliminates the manager designation then.
right.
yeah.
But there's also an issue here if there's a business that doesn't have a customer waiting area that's not a sole proprietorship.
Mhm.
This is still kind of
True.
doesn't tell them what to do.
Okay, is there a motion relative to this?
So I guess my first motion would be that we make the manager designation not applicable to sole proprietors.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on this one? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Just something else you wanted to add, Amber, or not? On that?
I mean, maybe you just say that the name and position of the manager should be prominently displayed in a public area.
Or-
It's rather than a customer waiting area.
Or-
I don't like.
Near display
Yeah, I mean,
licenses.
I don't care how it's worded, honestly, but
there a second?
Was that my motion?
What?
Was that my
Oh, I thought you made a motion. I'm sorry. Just trying to get things all moving.
I don't care how it's working.
There you go, Tim. Here's your activity there.
I like it.
All right.
All right. Is there a motion to that effect?
I'd move to ask staff to clean this up along the lines of our discussion. Bring it to
Second.
first reading.
Oh, wait.
Let's
So-
get more clarity on that.
We need a little more direction there.
Well,
Yeah,
so
yeah, a little more.
David, you mentioned displaying
Okay,
the
so-
name near the
Okay.
where the license is.
On the premises.
So rather than saying displayed in the customer waiting area, since there might not be one, I would move to ask that it be displayed near displayed photos and licenses.
Second.
Yeah.
Okay. Discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Anything else?
Oh, I got.
Hearing none, we'll close discussion. Anything else you want to say on this item? Good. Moving forward. Staff, anything else that you have questions on?
No, we'll make these changes and bring you back a final version.
Okay, just for those that did come, and appreciate you coming and giving input, would we anticipate this being on the 2 weeks from now on the agenda, or would it be in December?
Oh, 2 weeks, easily.
So
Yep.
You can, on the first reading of the ordinance, we will have public input as well too, so you're welcome. Someone gets posted on Friday night, you can look it over, and then we will offer public input. After the first reading, there'll be no public input. It'll be basically just going through the process of second and third reading. So this should be in effect about January 1 then, because it'll be 2 weeks, two more readings in December, and then it's got to get published as well sometime very end of this year, first part of next year, so very early. Okay, thanks for all your help and efforts. All right, disposition of communications to council, and we got quite a few.
This could be the longer than the rest of the meeting.
Some are just FYI, right? 3 of 4.
A few.
But we can talk about them anyway, right?
Oh, we sure
Let's
could.
not do that.
So just to be clear on these, when we have a staff memo that's already offering us options, is what we want to do either put it on the agenda or not put it on the agenda,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, thank you. Yep. Number 1, memo from Donald Com on MetroNet's request to attach the city-owned utility poles. Steve, you have
So we try to lay out some, our perspective on this request. And either decide, we tell MetroNet no at this time, or you want to put on an agenda to discuss the positive and negative aspects of this request. It's a little bit different. It's not on a utility poles that are in the right of way. They're on city property as they move close to our water and sewer plant. We could, Brian, we discuss other options with them perhaps that meet their needs, not exactly.
This requested route is, I think, much more convenient for their plans, but it has a lot of technical concerns with it. I think the key here is if this is not something that is going to be feasible, it would be better to decide that sooner rather than later, so that they can develop alternative plans. There are other ways for them to get around. It's just going to be a little bit more costly potentially and less convenient for them to do so.
So if you don't want us to proceed, you just don't pass it on and we'll inform them as such.
If it's not passed on, will that just give staff indication that MetroNet needs to find their way to get around and not waste staff
I think
time?
you can just pass a motion saying you're not interested in honoring their request and have staff work with them on alternate routes.
That's what I would move.
Second.
Okay, those in favor say aye.
Well, can we
Oh,
have
go ahead,
a
go ahead.
discussion? So I struggle with this. This seems like a bigger issue, and I don't feel like I have.
Okay, well, then you can't discuss it tonight, so you want to put it on the agenda to discuss further.
Well, I worry that there are implications of this that we're not giving full consideration to. I mean, if we're really serious about wanting to do something with improving the internet capacity, I don't know how to weigh this.
I think the right response then is to say that really all we've been told is that they'd like it if we allowed them to do this. And we've got a problem because it interferes with things in a way we didn't understand. If that's the only thing that'll work for them, they need to give us more information, more argument. And until then, I think we just.
Right. We're
Right.
asking
City
them
work-
to look at
city
other
work.
options with staff.
But if we put it on an agenda, then that gives them an opportunity to flesh that out. I think if we just dismiss it, then they're going to come back and they're going to write letters explaining more information. I don't know.
And maybe we'll put it on an agenda.
I just think we should just put it on an agenda now. And I'm not suggesting I know how it should turn out, but I don't know how we dismiss something this complicated in an out-of-hand manner.
I guess I'm not making this motion to dismiss it. I'm making this motion because I think staff is better placed to discuss the options with MetroNet. And as David said, I don't feel that we have enough information about why they need to go there, and staff
I
can
don't disagree
discuss
with
with
you.
them.
This is the question is, given the magnitude of what we're trying to do here in the larger project, what makes the most sense procedurally? I guess I'd like to just have a brief conversation with MetroNet on it, but you've got a motion on the floor.
Yep, motion made and second.
Yeah.
Those in favor of the motion, does everyone understand the motion, first of all?
Yes.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried. All right, staff report on East Industrial Area Utility Connection Fees. And I will say that the person who, Josh Boersma, had come earlier this evening, and I told him that because it's underneath this, under disposition, that there would be no public input, so he chose not to stay.
So you
I would move we put this on a future agenda.
Second.
Okay, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Hey, we saved money on the Brookside restroom project. Yeah, that's the next one.
Nice job, Keith.
Yes. All right.
All right, that's just FYI.
Yep.
All right, item 4, mainstream living request to purchase property at 1417 Douglas.
I move we put this on a future agenda.
Second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Abstain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Amber abstained due to conflict of interest. Item 5, memo from Damien regarding pedestrian infrastructure along Mortensen Road in Southwest Ames.
Move we put this on a future agenda.
Second.
Is it presumed that when we have this on the agenda, we would invite the school to, they have notice of this discussion?
School?
So this is the,
By the middle school.
yeah.
You mean the property owners? Or-
No.
No.
Well, of
Well,
course, the
and the
property
property
owners,
owner.
but this is in close proximity with Ames Middle School.
And Edwards.
And Edward.
Yeah, and Edwards. So it would just seem like this would be appropriate to do a courtesy note to the school system.
Sure.
Because they have so many students that are impacted by this. I know
And
that, I know that takes a motion, it's just a
Yeah.
courtesy
Request.
to pure government.
Tell them it's going to be on the agenda. So
Right.
Is there a motion on the floor?
There's a motion on the floor and second to put on a future agenda. Did you have something you wanted to comment on?
Well, I as part of putting it on a future agenda, I'd like to make sure that we reach out to the property owner to see whether they have interest in offering another solution that creates what we're looking for here, but maybe not using one of the options that we have in mind right now.
So for example, if they would be willing to put the sidewalks in themselves.
Then yes, come to the meeting, please.
No, I'm just
Sure.
saying, I
Yeah,
mean,
no,
they might say they can do it cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should
I'd
have
say
them,
we
we
should
should,
do
I mean, we should
cheaper,
let them
yeah.
know it's going to be on the agenda, yeah, and ask them to.
That's part of the understanding.
Well, or
Yeah.
should staff reach out and see if they're interested ahead of time? Because if they both would say, well, we'll just put them in ourselves under this timeline, then we can get rid of it.
That would be optimal.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
Sure.
So could you add to the motion then?
Sure, yeah, I would amend my motion to include reaching out to the property owner, the affected property owners.
Second.
Those in favor
And
say-
see if they'd be willing to pay for it up front, is what you're asking.
Put them in.
Well, and let them know we're talking about it and see what their thoughts
that's
are.
different.
See if they're willing
Yeah,
to do something more.
My only rationale is,
I just said reach
Well,
out to them.
specifically, if they are willing to pay up front, then we don't even have to have the meeting, right? To do it. We don't have to have it on the agenda. Maybe it's
True, yeah,
far-fetched,
I
but-
guess that's true. Yeah, okay. Yep. I would withdraw my previous motion. And I would move that staff reach out to the affected property owners regarding this topic and ask if they are interested in possibly paying for this upfront.
Mhm.
And if they're not, then I would move we put it on a future agenda.
very good.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstaining? Carried. Okay, thank you. All right, this next item, letter from U.S. Board on Geographic Names. Let's see. There's actually a form that I will need to send back into them and sign on behalf of council and mayor, and it gives like 4 options. One is you can decline to take any action. You can agree with the proposed name change. You can disagree with the proposed name change, or you can suggest other name changes. Essentially, it's a standard form that they want to fill out. So if you want to talk about it, and there were 2 people who did give cards wanting to talk about this, so it seemed, given that interest, it may be appropriate to put on the agenda and then have a formal discussion on that.
I would move we put it on a future agenda.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Carried. Okay. Is there interest in putting the email from Mark on regarding the trail question on a future agenda?
Actually, always looking for indication or motion to proceed with this
Further research, right?
further research, further research.
I move that we ask the legal department to research this further.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, item number 8, letter from Douglas Pepe regarding decriminalization or deprioritization of nonviolent cannabis possession arrests.
I move that we direct staff to write a letter declining to take further action on this.
Is there a second?
Yeah, second.
All right, seconded. Those in favor? Go ahead.
The point is that decriminalization is really a state issue. It is not a council matter, and right.
We have no authority over the law on this.
So part of that letter would clarify that then. We just say
Correct.
they need to be directed
And
to,
the deprioritization, I am extremely reluctant to instruct our law enforcement to have different levels of prioritization when they're enforcing the laws. Their job is tough enough already. I'm not interested in saddling them with that additional set of expectations.
those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Carried. And item 9, letter from Ames Climate Action Team, request for 5 actions to address climate change.
So, Mayor, I ask that this be put to the council for consideration. I think it's complicated, this one, because you've got 5 different subpoints. So I don't know if you want to take this by point, or you just want a letter or a motion in general putting this on an agenda. I don't know how to parse this one.
These seem
I
like
would-
they're really kind of action items or tasks for goal setting.
That's what I was just gonna say.
And we're only 2 months away from doing that.
The only one I was curious about is if hypothetically we know we wanted to budget for a climate action plan, is it helpful to have that information before goal setting for budgeting purposes.
Yes, you'll give us directions up front if you have certain ideas, and that will be at our December meeting with the city council, where you give us guidelines on the budget.
Okay.
So there, if you have some projects, that could be other, that you want in there, then you give me that direction.
So at least that part of it, the budgeting for the
We
potential
can
climate action
discuss
plan,
it.
that would be coming up already on a future agenda in
December.
December.
Yep.
December, yep.
If we,
So we're not taking action.
Right.
It's just more or less already being woven into what's already in play right now.
And you have to look at the other ones, how do they coincide or fit with the action plan itself?
Right.
Are you jumping ahead of some of the recommendations, or maybe not? I don't know.
Is it possible for us to get staff recommendations on this before goal setting?
yeah.
Which, I don't know that would be Mary or your team, Steve, or who, but
So a memo in response.
yeah, because I think that would be helpful to us at goal setting time to know what.
But in some ways, we've been working with Mary year by year with respect to various things we can do to improve our sustainability. Are you anticipating that this will all be new to her and that she would have new?
No, I'm
No,
anticipating that she could
prioritize and
recommend
help. Yeah.
which things might be higher on the list, or which things we'd be readily positioned
Yeah.
to do. We've got like you said, it's complex. We've got an array of things we could do. And I'd kind of like to know which ones either would have the most impact or easily, or that are the low hanging fruit that we should just say, yeah, why don't we do it? So I would like a staff memo on this so that we get some input.
On all of this?
I'll second.
All right, so first of all, you want a staff memo on this being what?
On the recommendations from the climate action team,
So all 5 points.
looking at the 5 points and identifying for us the next moves that might be most beneficial
Okay.
for the community. And that memo could come from any staff member that Steve identifies as appropriate.
It'll be a
this
staff
project.
report.
So the memo would be
All right,
in preparation.
Is there a second?
Second, in preparation for goal setting.
Yes.
I don't know.
So this is complicated. I mean, some of these things are clearly policy oriented. The primary goal of reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 or 2025 or 2050, that has enormous policy implications.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of your action plan itself. You wouldn't establish this before you have your plan. That's
No.
my
That makes it
response.
easy to write the memo on this thing.
Yeah, that's easy to speak to that.
As long as that's clear
true.
to staff.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
staff understands that they could just say that, I'm going to make this up, 2A, 2C, 3B, 4D, and 5B, C, and D.
So you want us to
Are
respond to
all-
all 5 A, B, C, D in each
Well,
category.
But I'm just saying that it could be saying,
It could be very short,
Some are
like,
going to be easy. Yes.
they
yeah.
could say that
We don't
those
recommend
items
them.
are going to be in a
Yeah.
climate
Mhm.
action.
Or
plan.
like, we'll be dealing with this in
Yeah.
March,
Some of
or
them
we'll
are
be
so
dealing with
hard,
this
they will
in-
be easy.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Some will be so hard, they'll be easy to answer.
And
you
they
mean?
get
Yeah,
to
Easy to-
pass it back
yeah.
to us. and say, hey.
Does this seem like, I want to make sure what we're doing, I look at this and this seems incredibly complicated. Does this seem like a?
Well, we'll respond to, we have to think about it. I don't want to jump ahead of the plan itself. This could be,
Yeah.
this could be the plan itself for some cities. So
Mhm.
I'm a little nervous. I haven't looked at them in depth. Maybe there's some we could pick off and do right away, but you'd think you'd want to have your
Well,
plan.
Steve, I think, for example, Allison mentioned the competition that the mayor might sponsor. That doesn't sound like something that's part of a climate action plan.
Right.
And if staff thought there was mileage in that, they could say, sure, why don't you go ahead and do it? I'm just not sure which of these belong in that longer, more complex conversation, and which ones really are easy enough for us to take on and move forward considering.
Sure. Let us have a chance to brainstorm and see what we come up with.
Okay, motion made, seconded. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. I think that is all of them to my knowledge. Moving on to council comments. Devin, you've been over there like a little church mouse. Just kind of
It's been 3 weeks since we last. I have one thing, by the way. It's been 3 weeks since we last met. And in fact, it was somehow, it seems like it's been forever, the joint meeting. And one of the things we talked about, I'd like to underscore the importance of it in light of recent events, right? So the first thing we talked about in that meeting was diversity and inclusion. And since that time, I have a little list that I wrote down earlier. That the night that happened, there were photos that came out of the student government advisor doing blackface in 2008. There was vandalism later in that week in the dorm, targeting with racist comments, targeting the CA and other residents on that floor. The police later questioned them, ISU police later questioned them, asking if they were asking for that type of vandalism. The name of the floor was Bean, and they were Latinx individuals. So I think you can understand what the racist remarks were. There were chalkings on campus that said "Hail Hitler," and this all led to protests led by the student body. Protests that blocked Lincoln Way, that brought demands to Wendy Winterstein. And the day of the protest, there was a student government meeting that they moved to the Great Hall. Not even our joint meeting could, make it so we didn't have enough room for everybody, right? So they had to bring it to the Great Hall, and there was a lot of voices, a lot of frustrations, and the main theme was that people feel unsafe. And it's not just people feeling unsafe on campus, it's people feeling unsafe in a community, that there's an atmosphere for people of color, for people within the queer community, for people of many different backgrounds, they feel unsafe. And I think that underscores the importance of that discussion that we had. It might not have been a very elaborate discussion with action plans or items, but I think I genuinely want us on council and to consider these harms. And I really want everybody to go back and listen to the harms that people mentioned at that meeting. There was a live stream, and it's posted on the student government YouTube channel. And I know that Gloria has watched through it. I was there for the event. I think it's really important to hear those concerns, because it's not just student issues, it's community issues. It's indicative of a larger Ames community, and it's indicative of problems that minorities, people of color, like I said, they face every single day. And while this is not a very diverse council, and many of the actions that happen don't make us feel unsafe, hundreds, thousands of people feel unsafe every single day in this community. And I think that's something we really need to focus on addressing in any way that we can. Thank you.
Do you have any suggestions?
I really wish I did. I think that it starts with listening to the problems, coming up with ideas ourselves, and I think it's more to underscore the importance. And I'm not saying that people here don't necessarily think that it's unimportant. I think that we all value it very much, right? These discussions and these problems. There were 10 things that the university has changed. There was a list of demands from the protesters. And then there were 10 items that the university came back with, most of them regarding trainings from staff, mandatory trainings, diversity and inclusion trainings, as well as they got rid of chalking, except for very specific events that chalking can be used for. I would suggest that, it was mentioned a couple of months ago. In fact, I went to the student government diversity and inclusion meeting. They have a committee on diversity and inclusion, and I asked the committee members to come back to me with any recommendations they have to suggest to you all. And one thing I came up with during that meeting was, I remember it was a month or two ago, we were talking about genders and documents that don't need gendered. We should probably have a review of all of city documents, applications for different things, and really question, is this something we need to ask them their sex on, right? So if there's a class that somebody can sign up for that's hosted by the city, does somebody really need to say what their gender identity is on that? Or yeah, in worst cases, they might ask for their sex, which then they don't give you the option to say what your identity is. And that's targeting one group and not targeting others. But I also think that there needs to be maybe mandatory diversity inclusion. I don't know how far the city's trainings go for staff, but strengthening that, deepening that, those trainings for diversity inclusion measures. I think that the events that happened in the last month alone are indicative of a culture and environment that is maintained and has been for a very long time. These aren't new things. People have always felt unsafe. But because of recent events, people are moved to speak about it. And I just think that it's on us to come up with the solutions. I don't necessarily have them right now, but there definitely needs to be some inward looking and introspection from members of council, the community in general, to see if there is something that we can do, I think.
Well, I know that, Dr. Winterstein and Dr. Stewart both were, engaged in conversation, and we built some really strong bridges with them. And so I will reach out to them and see if they have some ideas, but we do count all students as being part of our community.
Right.
Probably the trickiest thing that I think, and there's been some discussion internally also about campus is in Ames, but what happens on campus sometimes is kind of within its own realm and sphere as well too. And so it's you want to be really supportive of and understand and recognize what these issues are,
Right.
and they're terrible what's going on. So
I think it's worth pointing out that these aren't issues that are just faced by students. Anybody in the community.
I think it's well said, very well said, and I think that there are some conversations that should be had very, very soon, and I will don't need any motion. We'll take that on and to continue to build that relationship, because I know that we're all committed to the same end, and see what they have some suggestions as well too, and how we can start really better understanding the situation, and appreciate you sharing that. And we take it very seriously. And sometimes people think, well, why aren't you saying something? Well, the point is sometimes you have to be careful. You don't want to, aggravate the situation as well too. So that I think we definitely deplore what,
of course,
is going on. And unfortunately, it seems like some of it's faceless too. The perpetrators sometimes are very hard to identify who they are. It makes it even worse yet. But
yeah,
I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying
No, it does. It makes it very hard for there to be not just obviously there isn't legal measures that you can take against somebody unless it's straight up vandalism, like in one case that there was. But when there is no face to somebody who writes something like "Hail Hitler" in the middle of a walkway, there is no social response that person gets. And so they get to do it for free, and they get to hide behind the shield and say, these words don't hurt me, but they affect you every single day and make you feel unsafe. And it's disgusting. And I'm glad that we'll be working forward, and everybody will be thinking about that and finding ways, if any, that we can make a safer community as well as a more inclusive one.
Thanks for bringing it up, Devin.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else from you? Anything?
Oh, no, I'm good. That was it. That was a pretty long one though.
That's right. Gloria?
I'd like to just say I agree with Devin, and I know David and I both attended that campus conversation to listen. And I think that it is important that the students know that the council supports them and we represent them.
That's right.
And I would encourage everybody on council to take whatever opportunities you get to do some cultural competency training or whatever is offered. We get a lot of those things offered at Iowa State, and I've done a number of trainings with the real team from NLC, and I know that they are very supportive of communities and offering assistance in racial issues. So I hope that we'll do something in the future, whatever that is. I think that training is one of the big emphases that the university is focusing on in response to the student issues and the demands from the Students Against Racism. So on another note, a much happier note, I'd like to congratulate Vanessa Baker Latimer and Karen Server of the city staff, who have both recently been recognized for excellence at what they do.
That's right.
And that's a happy thing.
Absolutely.
I would also like to move that we place the International Partner Cities request on a future agenda so that we can discuss that opportunity.
Second.
All right. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining?
And I have one other motion, and that is I'd like to move that we place on a future agenda a discussion of the plans for the 321 state development.
Do you want to say any more specific about that?
In what sense? Like a
Do you want
date
to
for
give
it, or?
staff any more direction as far as what you're wanting to discuss?
I don't know if I do, because I'm conscious of not wanting to scare citizens with something that they might misinterpret.
But the contrary point is that if all we have is that we're going to discuss that, it doesn't really provide notice to the community of the substance of our conversation.
Well, that's true. Okay, so I will be more specific in my motion, which is that I would like to place on a future agenda discussion of altering our plans for the 321 state development in order to reconsider the opportunities for multifamily housing and the possibility of helping to meet several community needs with that project. Is that specific enough?
To include an indoor pool?
Well, yes. So one of our issues is the municipal pool, and that could be a point of discussion.
I'll second the motion.
And that's just to determine whether the council is interested in pursuing this at all. So if you
So
want to
would
have a
we-
discussion about it,
Would we not want to get some information from staff first before we put it on an agenda?
This is about if we want to get that information, or what information we want.
Did say agenda. The motion did say put on the agenda.
I'm conscious of the fact that we are supposed to be going out for a bid.
Proposal to hire a consultant to start designing the subdivision the way, according to our last direction. So it's a good time. If you're going to change it, to do it quickly, to tell us to put the brakes on and maybe
So
alter that concept.
Would it be more helpful, Steve, to have a different motion that directs staff to give us a report on the possibilities for this property?
Well, I think
I
Kelly
just want to
laid
start
out,
the discussion.
Kelly already laid out the option. I think that's preference, or another alternative is to, Kelly, you can come up here, but his concept was to change, this is not going to be accepted by everybody. It was to change Franklin Park, quite frankly, to multifamily. I'm just telling you, that's
That
what
was
will be on the
original-
agenda.
Yeah.
And then that'd be part of the discussion. I'm just telling you what would come back from staff.
But here's the concern I have with this. I mean, really, really candid, and that is we have a neighborhood association that was very, very adamant about how this site was to be used. And we've gone through this before in terms of there's a passion on this council for being true to what we've talked about and agreed to previously. And I would just say point blank, I think this is really a bad idea without first engaging the neighborhood association in a conversation before it even comes before council, because I got a courtesy to them. They should be part and parcel of that. I know that we own the property, but this is a deviation. And to me, this is breaking trust. And especially if we're starting to talk about other elements on that.
That's not the point of the motion. The point of the motion is to determine whether council is interested in pursuing this at all in order to engage the neighborhood association. I talked to Steve about this earlier, and it's a chicken and egg thing. We could approach the neighborhood association, but if council isn't interested in pursuing it, then why broach the topic? Or we can find out whether council is interested in pursuing it and then do the neighborhood outreach.
We really don't have the margin in the course of council comments to have a robust deliberation about it.
No.
So this is just to have that initial conversation.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there's a motion.
And I second it.
Seconded. Those in favor, does everyone understand the motion? Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining?
Nay.
Motion carries.
Just to clarify, is there anything you need from staff besides just a discussion?
You were going to say something,
Well,
David?
yeah, I mean, I think we should keep the initial discussion pretty simple, because I think even before we go out to neighborhood associations to see whether they see what their level of interest is, we have to be able to say something concrete about what we're talking about rather than just kind of guessing what the possibilities might be. I don't think we're equipped to do anything other than speculate at this point. So we need to have a discussion where we decide whether we're going to ask staff to do that or not.
But you don't need anything in preparation of that meeting.
I don't think so.
Unless we wanted to look again at the staff report that presented those original options.
We didn't discuss an indoor recreation.
No.
Circumstances have changed. That's what's going on.
We talked about a public park option.
Talk about a park there.
Mhm.
Which could obviously could include something with an indoor building as well. But, I mean, from a site planning perspective, I don't know that it's a whole lot different than anything we've ever talked about before. I think it's a different use on the site. But that's why you're going to talk about it, I guess, if that's an interest or not.
Kelly, if you could include for reference purposes, and I do not remember, maybe somebody can help me out, the last meeting where we looked at the subsidy, the level of subsidy that would be required per lot, I think was in the vicinity of $80,000 to $90,000 per lot.
Correct.
And it would be a helpful data point to have that material. I don't remember where that was, but have that for reference purposes for the discussion.
Sorry, your last discussion was in June, if you recall. Your direction at that point was to move ahead with hiring a civil engineer to design a single-family subdivision, but to bring concepts back before preliminary plat approval for possibly doing other uses on part of the site. We're reviewing RFP responses on Thursday, so we'll be in a good position to know where we are in terms of hiring a consultant. So it's timely to move ahead on this. It's if you're going to do this, it needs to be on agenda rather soon rather than later. And that it fits in the direction you gave us in June. We haven't committed anything yet since June. That information, we probably had some information in June, but we had those kinds of numbers were in the prior year's reports as well. So we could kind of nutshell.
I appreciate
all
that. Thank
for
you.
Steve, can you speak to the Franklin Park development effort in this?
Well, that's another good point. We promised we'd make some changes. I've got to get a hold of Keith. I don't know, Deb, do you know? I don't anybody know about when they were going to make the improvements? We had worked with that group.
Probably discussion beyond what we can have.
I'll have to check. I don't know right now, but you're right. There's another aspect to it. It's moving ahead and making those improvements in Franklin Park. I'm just going to have to check.
Yeah, so they've moved ahead. They've gotten to a design of like the sidewalk and picnic shelter. There's not a whole lot in it. They've come through DRC for that, but I don't think they've put the bid package together yet.
They haven't put the bid back.
I don't think so.
So it looks like
Again,
it's stopped.
this is something that either it's going to be a discussion now or we're going to be moving in multiple directions and it'll just be it'll just be something finally.
Once we vote on that, we vote on that.
Well, and I just want to clarify, I fully intend that if we decide to move direction, that we talk to the neighborhood association, but I don't see how we can have that conversation without having this on an agenda to decide if we want to have that conversation.
And as a matter of course, we'll reach out to them and let them know this is happening. We'll probably talk to them a little bit in advance so they're not caught off guard other than this.
So I just think that out of courtesy, given how much effort was put into it, I think it'd been appropriate to have at least made them aware that this motion might be coming before it hit the public. That's all. Because they put a lot of time into it. We agreed to go a certain direction. They had every reason to believe that. And now all of a sudden it's coming back. And I understand that you want to see if the council has any interest, but the point is, I think it's just a common, in my opinion, and I just think it would have been courteous to let them know we're talking about this, but all of a sudden you could have this thing could grow into and take on its own life before it even has any conversation. I understand that you might just say, well, council may not support this, but I want you to be aware this may be coming down the pipe. I think it would be beneficial and courteous because especially when you start mentioning Franklin Park, you remember how much time they spent talking about that and how passionate they were. So it's just a matter of we're all committed to fully engaging the community. And we just want to make sure that they're aware of it. And we all sat through it. So
This is what it's doing. I mean, I think I'm missing your point, John. I think we're trying to have a conversation and invite them to the table. I don't.
I'm just saying that before tonight, to have called and talked to some people in neighborhood associations saying a motion's being made, just want you to know what we're going to be talking about. The council may not have any interest in it, but now when it hits it will be in the media. It could take a life of its own. It's just more or less just a process of letting them know what was being potentially considered. It's coming out of left field. And you may not agree. That's fine. And we've agreed that when we leave here tonight, if you don't agree with me, that's fine. I respect that as well too. That's just my opinion. I just feel as you can tell, feel pretty strongly about it.
And I feel strongly about it too, John, which is why before I brought this up, I talked to Steve about whether we could do the outreach or not and what made sense. And I also was trying to avoid having this turn into something larger by simply saying we would have a discussion. Because I'm very conscious of how much this impacted that neighborhood.
Okay. Anything else? Gloria, anything else tonight?
No.
David?
Okay, if you'll recall, we recently had a conversation on incentives for conversions of rental properties back to owner occupied. And that was a good discussion. We made some staff motions that I think may have set staff to working on a problem, but it's kind of unclear to me what our sequencing of events is going forward. For example, we discussed at the meeting also reaching out to landlords and other stakeholders to get their input before things move forward. Thinking about what we did at the meeting, I came to the conclusion that I supported the wrong program. I think I would rather have changed it. And so I'd like to go back and talk about it some more, but I don't know how that plays into what we've already asked staff to do and what's coming next. Does council understand this any better than I do as to what the next step is going to be?
I bet if you put it back on the agenda, they're going to halt their work if they have started any.
Kelly, you want to explain remember the direction they gave us to put together a program? We went through this with you on the elements of a program.
Yeah.
We haven't moved.
Okay.
We haven't moved ahead on anything since that workshop.
Okay.
And that's what's finishing up the caper and some other things. So we'll probably start to get organized around that direction in the next couple of weeks.
But you remember the program, basically? The incentive program?
The direction, I think all I can recall right now is that we needed to come back in January with an idea of an outline of a program so you could budget appropriately. And there was an expectation, some outreach, set a budget, and then deal with details of a program as that went forward in the spring. July 1st would be the first time money could be available for any program. So we had at least 6 to 8 months to kind of figure out what we wanted to do.
Okay, well, so I've communicated with all of you about what I'd like, why I'd like to talk about this again. And so I'll just move that we put on a future agenda that topic again of rental conversion incentive programs to discuss it further.
Second.
And I just think that, we talked about it during one meeting. We had no public input during that meeting that I recall. And kind of hard to conclude that we nailed it on the first try. Anyway, I think that it could use some modifications.
So I was opposed to this, but it just sort of, once the council makes a decision like this, I don't understand the procedure of pulling it back on and saying, let's take another bite of the apple. Help me understand just sort of the procedure of this.
What do you mean by the procedure? The procedure is I made a motion to do it, and we just have to decide whether we want to talk about it more or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, it's a change of mind, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about what the decision we came to and thinking like, oh, maybe there is a more.
Would this be in lieu of the other program? So we would stop?
Yes, if the proposal that I have in mind is something that would that would fulfill the purpose of the other program and what I think is a simpler way and would have other advantages as well. So it would replace the other program, but
So we can put on hold then if they pass this, don't put on hold any work.
yeah, that's the idea.
I think if you recall that night, everyone was kind of confused about the direction or like a lot of the details of what everyone was talking about. And I don't think a lot of people were on the same page throughout the whole discussion. So I think that like it's really definitely like worth, from a council standpoint, when people have had the time to like think about it a second time, to then revisit it and say, okay, yeah, maybe we should like revisit what we should direct council toward, because now all of a sudden multiple people might not support whatever staff comes back with. It might be a waste of staff's time at that point if they come back with something and now all of a sudden multiple people on council say, well, I actually don't support what I was giving direction to these people for, right?
In fairness, I think we should assume the council knew what they were voting on.
I would hope so.
That we never make any mistakes?
No, that we know what we're voting on.
We know what we're voting on.
It was a very drawn out conversation that
We have lots of
everyone
fun
was-
conversations, but ultimately we come down to votes. It'd be sort of odd if we didn't really know what we're voting on.
Yeah, multiple people during the discussion pointed out how confused they were about what was happening or being discussed.
Okay.
My concern, Mayor, is just the protocol. I'm trying to remember back in history where normally there's a protocol if we want to reconsider the losing party brings something back. I
David
just
was
don't know
on the-
procedurally how we do this.
Oh, but I mean, David was on the presiding side
This
of
is
that.
not a motion for reconsideration. This is a motion to put something on an agenda for further conversation. Pretty simple.
Same diff though, right?
It seems
No,
pretty
it's-
similar.
I think
All
it's legally different, but anyway, it's just a motion to continue that conversation. And if you don't want to continue it, then I know how you vote.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Motion failed. Anything else? David?
Oh, no, not for me.
Nothing tonight.
Chris?
Nothing tonight.
I just have a little one. On our trip to Fort Collins, they did some neat art with their electrical boxes, and I told Steve that I was going to be asking for a memo from staff on beautifying our electrical boxes. So I'd like to move for that memo from staff.
Second.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Anything else?
Nope.
Amber?
Just real quick, just a quick congratulations to the Mary Greeley paramedics team, who was chosen as the Iowa EMS Association
Wow.
EMS Service of the Year.
Oh, cool.
Anything
Like
else?
that.
I have one thing, that is, as council's aware, each of you serve on like a board or commission, and those terms don't coincide with one another when they expire. Some are June 30, some are calendar year, some is, I think, April 1. And so I've visited with, Mark and Steve about seeing if council will be supportive of just directing Mark to go ahead and look into it, give some advice. I would like to recommend that we look at doing calendar year, and that way he'll have to check with the AEDC, with the ACBB, check the transit, make sure that those, if there's any changes to bylaws or whatever, those have to be proposed to those organizations. But that make it much easier for rearranging, and also the watershed that you're on as well too. And in that way, we can just make switches and not have to worry about someone being off a board for 6 months or trying to, do this little shuffle. So I just need a motion to give Mark, ask Mark to look into it and then come back with suggested changes, if any, to our ordinances if necessary.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right, very good. Thank you, everybody.
It's adjourned.
We are adjourned. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, shoot. Got in there.
We are adjourned.
Got in there?
Got right under the
Sugar
gavel.
there.